Good afternoon everyone and welcome to today's Cleaner Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The main business today is we're going to be looking at active travel. However, I hope you've all got an agenda in front of you, so we'll start off with agenda item 1, welcome and introductions. I'd like to welcome all members and officers, officers will be here in a minute, to today's Cleaner Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just to inform you, Councillor Giles and Councillor Burnett will only be able to stay until 3 o'clock, but with a bit of luck we'll have got through most of the agenda by then. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings. I have not received notice that members or invited attendees wish to use Welsh today, therefore the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind you that the meeting is being webcast, therefore can I ask that you turn off silence your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. For your information, there are no planned fire drills today, but in case of fire alarm sounding, please follow the signs to exit the building, and we're all very familiar with that. Can I remind all members to sign the attendance register and confirm if any apologies you've received for this meeting? Chris, I think we've had some apologies.
We have, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillors Gaynor James and Neil Waite.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Could I ask if any members should have any declarations of interest, that they should declare them now, and obviously they should put them on the back of the attendance register? I don't think, yes, Stuart?
Yeah, it's not a declaration of interest as such, but we're all users of these facilities as well, and active travel plays a big part in our lives.
Thank you. I don't think that needs to be formally declared, but that's noted.
Cumbrian Community Council does get involved in this quite heavily, but if there's anything that comes out that involves that, I'll do it as we go along, right?
Yeah.
Council will be involved.
Yeah. I don't think we need to declare interest on that. Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of September 2019. Please, could I ask members to scan the minutes for accuracy and confirm the minutes are an accurate account of the record? I'll quickly just go through page by page, just to give you an opportunity. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think the numbers of pages are a bit odd here, but it doesn't matter. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10.
I recommend.
Okay, were they approved?
Yeah, approved.
Seconded, right, the minutes are approved. We can then move on to agenda item 4, the action sheet. I'll get my words out. Please could Chris update members on any actions outstanding?
Chair, this isn't the meeting I usually cover, but I believe the action sheet was sent. I believe the recommendations from the previous meeting were sent around to members, and I think they've been received as well. So
Thank you very much. I'll just let, is the mic set up for Gwyn?
Yes.
Welcome back, Gwyn. I use the word welcome back because obviously you were a very active member of this committee for many years. Gwyn now is here today representing Sustrans, and we've got some questions for you, Gwyn, but I'm going to start off by asking you to give a brief overview of your view and how it links into this report, and then we'll move on to questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So perhaps just to give you a brief idea of my role within Sustrans. I'm what's known as a network development manager. That's sort of, at the moment, it sort of consists of 3 things. So Sustrans sort of works on a
a number of different projects. So we get a core grant from Welsh Government. The idea of that core grant is that we can work with local authorities, community groups, and Welsh Government itself, advising them on active travel. We do direct commissions. So, for example, a piece of work we did last year for the South East Wales regional local authorities, we did an audit of all signage and access controls on the network, which all local authorities have been provided with that information, and from that some actual work is going on at the moment. And then there's Sustrans applied for funding, so another example of that is we applied for RDP funding, and one of the schemes we worked on was Ascot Pontypool walking and cycling route, which is in development at the moment. And then from Sustrans as an organisation, we can help with things like policy and consultation on active travel. And then there's a whole sort of hardware design of it, so we can do design of routes, whether that's highways or greenways. And the sort of what I call the software side of it, so behaviour change, talking about behaviour change. And obviously, as mentioned in the reports, we do quite a lot of schools work as well.
Thank you very much. I think what I'll do is move straight into the questions, and hopefully if members have got any issues that Gwyn has raised now, we'll pick them up there. We've got 6 questions, that's one each today, so I'm going to start. Gwyn, first question. Do you feel Torfaen Council has made adequate progress in relation to active travel, and do you feel partnership working between Sustrans and the Council is strong enough?
Yeah, definitely progress has been made. Obviously the local authority has to comply with the Active Travel Act, which they've done successfully over the last couple of years. I think it mentions, I won't go into too much detail about the Active Travel Act, but basically there was a couple of stages it mentions in the report. An ERM, so the existing routes map, which the officers did a few years ago now, and then there's a thing called the INM, which is the Integrated Network Map. This is all about your sort of 15-year plan. So that obviously was presented to Welsh Government and was successfully accepted by them. So definitely the local authority is complying with what it needs to. I guess my view and other views of people who want more walking and cycling is you can never do enough. But then again, you know, I think the local authority is making best use of the resources it's given. Resources are scarce, and certainly Welsh Government are demanding a lot of local authorities with the resources they're given. And then perhaps part of your second question is the Sustrans partnership. Again, it'd be great to do more. I think our partnership is really good. That's based on personal relationships with officers by and large and councillors. But I think that's really strong. But like I said, you can always do more if you've got more resources.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering, Gwyn, and thanks for that. You mentioned about you liaise with councillors as well, or councillors liaise with you. Can you give us a rough guidance on how many times you have approached councillors, or they've approached you?
Probably with this authority, not so many. Obviously, it was really interesting to be involved in the scrutiny committee before. For me, I think that was more of a benefit for me because I learned a lot about the way the council operates and the sort of the restriction on resources and things that you've got to work with. Obviously, Stuart's contacted me a few times. I can't think of the other lady now that's contacted me. Fiona Cross has contacted me a number of times. So we are certainly open to any councillor contacting us. And as I said, part of our core grant is to sort of deal with that and perhaps try and help you with issues you might have going forward. You know.
Thank you, Gwyn.
Do you want to ask the next question, please?
Hey, Gwyn, good to see you back. Are there any further developments you think Torfaen aim to, sorry, I'll read again. Are there any further developments that you think Torfaen should aim to achieve?
So it's interesting that Torfaen are going to be sort of driven to do more work on the Active Travel Act. So as I mentioned before, this ERM, Existing Routes Map, and Integrated Network Map, that's got to be renewed every 3 years. So your officers over the next year will be renewing those maps and that bit of work. So they've got a hell of a lot of work coming up in the next year. That's going to be demanding this time around because obviously the Deputy Minister for Transport, Lee Waters, is quite demanding and wants to see the work done to a higher level. Obviously the first round that they did that, there was a lot to be learnt. I think the officers have learned quite a lot, but there's obviously still more to do. So that process sort of helps the local authority develop their plans overall. And that's got to be delivered by February 2021. So the officers are going to be, there's a lot of work to do on that. The officers are going to be up against timescales. And having to deliver it in February 21 is not great because that's the time when the officers are usually applying for bids to other things. They're finishing their finances because of the end of the financial year. So I hope that date's going to change, but certainly the officers in post at the moment are going to need as much support as possible to complete that task, I think. So that sort of helps with the development going on. It's great to see things that are developing in the local authority, especially, especially keen about the developments that are going on Pontypool and New Inn Station. Because I think that's, although we're building a big car park, that's going to potentially help with, reducing carbon and things like that, getting people off the roads onto public transport. And if we can link that in with really good walking and cycling links into the station as well, which I know the guys outside are already working on, I think that's going to be a great development for the local authority. And it's going to have a regional impact as well as local as well.
Thank you. Stuart, you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm looking at this question and realise it's the only one we're giving you a question on development. We've got officers there, but how can councillors, and by inference other people that we work with, like community councils and people that feed into this process, because obviously there's more officers do work in partnership with councillors and community councillors and all the rest in the community, and you're obviously sensitive to that as well because you've had those conversations.
I think the way councillors can really help. So the officers now in creating the next integrated network map, there's going to be a consultation process. So they'll probably be coming to you before that formal consultation process saying, what do you think of these and all that. And I think you guys are the eyes and ears on the ground. You've got the local knowledge. Active travel is all about getting people to walk and cycle. So it's not necessarily people like me because I'm going to do it anyway. It's all about getting those people who don't do it now and really understanding that. So hopefully, as part of this consultation process going forward, there's a plan in place at the moment that Welsh Government will be providing an extra resource, some consultants to help with the consultation process. The key thing about that though is, I think what would be nice is if I was an officer, I'd be saying, oh, consultants coming in, they're going to do that job for me, I don't have to worry about that, I can get on with everything else. But these consultants are not going to have the local knowledge. So the people who work on consultation within the local authority would need to work very closely with, hopefully, this extra resource that will come from Welsh Government.
I'm involved in another place is place planning community, and I presume you know well about that. I hope you do anyway.
I certainly know a little bit about placemaking. I'm certainly not an expert, but if you need more advice on that, I can certainly put you in contact with more of an expert than I am on placemaking. But it's certainly something we are really interested in. Active travel is all about those short journeys as well. It's all about making that place, the kind of places you want to be travelling through. The one thing I always say is about sort of placemaking, if you like, is when your screensaver comes on your television or on your computer, you never see pictures of dirty old streets and lots of traffic and all that. You always see pictures of nice sort of scenery, and that's usually where people want to be.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Ron, can you ask that one, please?
That's a really good question. It's something that comes up all the time. I think definitely is conflict, and there are issues around that. I think the one thing we've got to consider with conflict, though, is there's people having a bad time is probably a smaller proportion. So there's still a lot of people presumably having a good time there. Interesting enough, I can give you sort of two examples within Torvine about how conflict works and it doesn't work. So the Open Hearth pub alongside the canal, as a nightmare of a place. I've heard really bad stories about that, and especially about cyclists being pretty awful to people who are just there to have a drink and their kids are running around, and they just got to respect that space, I think. Then on the other hand, another project we work with on the Canals and Rivers Trust, where the canal goes from Pontymoll Basin and goes through the cut-in, it's really narrow. So I used to use that route quite a lot, and the way people interact and give and take, because they know it's narrow and people might fall into the canal, they share that space. So there's good bits and bad bits. So yeah, I recognise there is conflict issues, and I guess there's we've all got to learn to share that space, really.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, totally agreement there. I mean, as we know, I have family that walk the canals or whatever, and there are, whatever you're involved with, then you get the ones that don't have any respect, and it's a low percentage of it, but you always get that. I mean, I've had a few complaints of bikers being disrespectful or whatever, but that's the minority and not the majority, and it's just educating these people to share the space and be respectful to people. But I've had a few complaints about people on bikes, but it's just trying to educate them. Will we ever educate them? They think it's their space and their space only.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what you said, Ron. Unfortunately, cyclists think it's just for them. You said you recognise there are conflicts. When are you doing anything to try to improve the harmony between cyclists and pedestrians and young mothers, and even, I don't know whether they are allowed to be on there, the people with horses?
Perhaps to answer the horse question, there are certain areas that horse riders are allowed on there. I'm reasonably sure that some of the maps we did for Torvine Council quite a while ago did indicate where horse riders are. Sustrans are always, we'd always promote, shared use to a degree. We've just produced some design guidance on traffic-free cycle routes. That sort of lists a number of things. So in some instances, shared use path might be best, like we've got now. The usual thing to try and avoid with shared use path, which is perhaps a bit contrary to what I just said about the canal, is that the wider the path, the better. Some of the issues you probably get near Blunavan, for example, is it's downhill. Wow, you can go so fast. It's a really good, smooth route for cyclists. It's great, so I think that's obviously an issue. The other side of that is, we don't want to stop people. You don't want to start putting restrictions in routes. That's sort of just counterintuitive, really. We really want people to use stuff. So there's some emerging guidance. Some of the work I've seen about sort of shared use and how people interact, there's no I can't say I can give you the sort of say you do this and you won't have a problem anymore. It's a difficult one to solve. I guess it's a little bit like people using their phones when they're in their cars, but it's a very difficult problem to solve.
Can I come back very briefly, Chair? So have you got any plans to put some signage in place to say that it is a shared facility, you know, because lots of people in Blaenavon, in my ward, are coming to me and saying cyclists is right behind them and they're ringing a bell and get out the way, and it's not very nice. Are there any plans in place? You mentioned the guidance to put signage in place.
We can certainly advise the officers on the sort of emerging guidance that we get and any work that Sustrans is doing with any other bodies around sort of how to counteract that behaviour, and we can certainly give them advice and designs on signage as well. So that wouldn't be a problem. I think the one thing we've got to be wary of with signage is what we always try and do is not try to treat each group equally. So if we say the cyclists, so if there was a sign saying cyclists slow down, we'd probably say something like dog walkers keep your dog on a lead. So try and, there's fault in everybody, so to try and even it out as well. But how you solve the problem and eradicate it completely, very, very difficult, yeah.
Stuart, I got a couple of councillors wanting to come in. Can I just say, Gwyn, on the design guidance produced by Sustrans, could you perhaps send Kath a link to that?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure many of us would be interested in that. Now, yeah. I got 3 councillors waiting to come in, and 4 now. Norma's next. Norma?
Thank you, Chairman. Gwyn, it's a very simple question. I always thought pedestrians would take priority. Is that right?
Yeah, we would always consider that pedestrians and horse riders would take priority over cyclists. I'm pretty sure that's enshrined in law as well as for bridleway use. Whether it's been challenged on cycleways, I'm not sure. I think part of the problem is the name of the route. They're called cycleways. And I would say within Torvine, the majority of people on these cycle routes are walking. Yeah. So, but I would agree with you that cyclists should give way to horse riders. Similar hierarchy to when you're on the road. So if I was cycling on the road, I would expect car drivers and truck drivers to give way to cyclists as well.
Next one, Stuart Ashley.
You've just raised one of the problems you've got with cycleways. I think I've cycled every single cycleway in Torvine. At the moment, not cycling, I'm pedestrian because of bad legs. But the problem, I think, is the name. That's one of the problems. The other is that if you go on some of the best cycleways we've got in Torvine, which is the one in Crossy Killog, it's mainly full of people exercising dogs. And if you try to cycle along, I said this at the committee the other day, that in fact it's full of dogs on extra long leads. My main question was, I've seen in London on the canal there, they've actually gone to the point of codifying all this. We've got it online, but we're not explicit with it, and it's not so much a punitive codifying so much as a positive codifying, and I'm wondering whether we've got to be more explicit with that. And if it's on the canal system around London that they've got such problems. I think Bristol Cycleway's got the same problem as well, where you've got stonkers there. That's people that belt up and down the Bristol Cycleway. I don't know if you've been on it, but if you go on Bristol Cycleway, you've got these idiots that go up and down there. They're absolute pain. They do about 40 miles an hour all the way up and down, don't they? And that is murder for anybody who wants to get on there. We haven't got too many of those, thankfully, around here. But with stonkers, or whatever name you want to give them, what you do about them other than get in the way of them, I don't know, I'm say what you do, but I put in a large cargo bike in the middle of the way of them, stops it. But you've got people that do exercise, and they are really nasty, some of those. I really don't like them. But codifying the use of, and I do agree, now I'm a pedestrian, having someone stonk past you is not a good idea. What we need to be a little bit more explicit, I do agree with my colleagues on this, with signage, balance is a good idea, but we need to codify and get that over as an education thing. I wonder where Sustrans got a view on that, please.
Yeah, I certainly agree with everything you said. It's interesting that the two places you've quoted, certainly the canals in London, the sort of usage level is probably much higher.
Yeah.
Similar thing with Bristol, the Bath Path, they get an issue with when the school's coming out. In some respects, if we find that our conflict issues are actually going on, we should sort of, in a bizarre sort of way, see that as success, because there's a lot more people using the routes. But then we need to work then to try and resolve those things. So some of the things they do in the Bristol Bath Path, for example, is certain areas they're actually making it much wider. So there's some work being done around, should paths be shared use? Should they be separated? And as we go forward and as we develop, so for example, if you go to Holland, you'll see that the sort of cyclists are completely separated from pedestrians, but they've been doing that since 1970, and we've only sort of just started. So we're going to have to move to that. So we're going to have to deal with these problems and evolve as we go along. And in some places, it's a particular problem in the valleys. Space is at a premium, and it is going to be quite difficult for us to improve some of the routes as we go forward.
Ron, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Gwyn, you said about the success of these pathways and more people using them, and you did say it's signposted cycle route. And if there are more walkers using it, about changing the signage then. If it's public footpath, because there are more people using it, and again, it's educating people. There's a cyclist think it's a cycle path, and it ingrains them, this is our cycle path, and it's just coincidental that people walking on it. So that's one of the things that go in my mind. And we touched on horses earlier, Stuart did. I live in a horse world, and the complaints I get is there's not enough bridle paths, and we look after the walkers, we look after the cyclists, we don't look after, if you come past my house any day, horses everywhere, and they have to go on the roads, and we don't provide anything for the horses then. They're limited, as you've just said, that's just the thing. And then when we use lots of dogs on the canals or whatever, and my biggest complainant is my wife, because there's a lot of walking with the sister, and she comes home and says about dog fouling, and they're still doing it on the pathways. And I said, really? Oh yes, she said. And if the bins that overflow in, which they are sometimes, but she said dogs are still fouling on the canals. Not that I ever see it, because I don't walk anywhere.
Moving off the subject.
Yeah, but on the pathways, and it's educating people there. But the bridle paths is not enough of, and changing the signage to say public footpath, not cycle routes.
I think we'll try and pick up this signage issue. Obviously, it's not going to be for Sustrans to do. They can advise, but it'll be for the that's going through loud and clear about signage. So we'll pick that up with the officers in a minute.
If I may, I just touch briefly on what you just said. Although we're sort of going a bit away from active travel, we do sort of, Sustrans recognises that there is a sort of leisure element to all of this as well, and that will encourage people to active travel. So, going to school, going to work or wherever in the future. I'm sure dog mess is a perennial problem everywhere. I think it's probably a number one complaint within the council. And then talking about horses, Sustrans has got a really bad rap with the horse community by and large. We do work really hard with the British Horse Society. The key thing for me is about using potential, let's say, walking and cycling routes for horse riders, is how that's used to link up bridleways so that horse riders have got a really good network so that they don't have to go on the road. And I think making it clear where horse riders can go and where they can't is paramount. But I think it's horse riding is it's got to be considered if you're developing routes, they've got to be considered because I think it's big business and it brings a lot of money into the area as well. So I think it's not to be ignored for sure.
I'm just wondering, somebody still with the mic on? No. I'm just wondering that on the leisure routes, I'm sure it's labelled up as leisure routes signposted in the Aberystwyth, and we'll have to double check with the officers. Do you have trouble with dogs running free on the cycle tracks? I find, well, leisure routes, I find a couple of times I've used the leisure routes, and there's people, and they just leave their dogs off the lead running around. They say, oh, it's okay, the dog won't hurt you. And it's like running up to your bikes or running up to you with your dog. Is an issue you find with that? And also, as you touched on, when I go down to Cardiff Bay and use their leisure routes, it is like segregated. You've got a line, one part is for cyclists, one part is for pedestrians. And you've touched on that, and I think that would be a good option for wider sections of the leisure routes within Torvain.
But just to touch on those 2 points, I love using the routes when it's absolutely pouring down with rain, because there's nobody else using them, which is great. So, and dogs, are an issue. I think what we need to do is encourage cyclists to sort of embrace that a bit. The thing about cycling is it's all about momentum. It's really difficult when you're sort of almost slowing right down and stopping starting, but I think there's an element that you sort of need to engage with people. That's one of the good things about building walking and cycling routes, is that you're engaging with people. You're not sort of isolated away in your car. The other point you said about segregation, I'll send Catherine some information about that. What we have found is that usually when you put a white line down a path, it doesn't really work. So I found that myself, but it could be a good place to start.
The other part of the major part of our canal network, our network, is the canals. So we're engaging with the Canal and River Trust, we're engaging with boat owners, we're engaging with fishermen, and we're engaging with canoeists, which are regarded as the lowest of the low by fishermen. They do not like them in one shot. So how we deal with that tension, which is not one like the urban cycleway at all. What's your experience of that little conundrum? I was on Brecon Beacons Authority, and they obviously part of Torvain's in there as well. How do we deal with that one?
I guess you've got sort of two different types of canal within Torvain in a way. Once you get past Pontypool, it's much more rural in nature. Between Pontypool and Newport, it's a much more urban setting. I think the best way to look at that is you've already done some really great work on putting new surfaces on some of the canal towpaths, but I would go back and look again to see if you can maximise the width of those paths, because at the moment the canal envelope, if you like, is a really great corridor through the local authority. So you've got this spine route that starts to join everything up, and you can bring in shorter routes in from the side. So I think it'd be a worthwhile exercise to go away and say, what can we do to maximise the width on the canal, and in some places perhaps even reduce the gradient.
Thanks for that. We've actually covered questions 2, 3 and 4 by now, so I'm going to move off them. Just before we move on to question 5 of our little list here, Gwyn, you mentioned about when you were talking about London and Bath, about when they get busy, that's an indicator of success. Yes. Now, when we get to the officers, we're going to ask them, you've got all these existing routes you've developed, how are you measuring if they've been successful or not? I just wondered, we're going to ask the officers this, we weren't going to ask you, but as you raised it, I wondered if you had any views.
It's a good question. Certainly monitoring in the past hasn't been done that much. It is usually a requirement of when you get a grant from Welsh Government that you monitor. The problem is with that, though, is over the years, Welsh Government, they'll admit this themselves, they once they give out grants, they don't necessarily, they're not policing what's happening. I think you'll see potentially more of that. So officers that got loads and loads of things to do anyway, they think, oh well, perhaps I'm not going to do the monitoring, or it's something that, oh, I'll do that in a minute, and then it sort of gets forgotten. So I think we have got to definitely be better at monitoring, and there's some indications that walking and cycling is actually going down in Wales. So how do we change that? And part of that is doing more monitoring to understand what the issues are and why it potentially is going down. But I think the officers probably recognise that more monitoring needs to be done. It's how you do it. Yeah.
We are going to ask them, Gwyn. It was just in the context of what you said earlier. I was interested. Stuart, you want to come in?
Yeah, when you put, Pete started it. I'll do a little bit more if I may. That question of the officers, the actual nuts and bolts of it, in terms what does success look like? Obviously, walking, cycling. What else would Sustrans regard? Because we spent a lot of money on this stuff, and is it more people doing it or better quality? And you've said about widening. I mean, I would agree with you on that. But and then more people on bikes, more people walking, more people being active. What are the measures you consider successful?
It's interesting. I think there's this sort of process around what we sort of, me as a network development officer, what I would see as success is perhaps constructing new routes, improving routes and things like that. So then there's that sort of hardware, what I would call the hardware side of it, and then there's the sort of how we changing behaviour and how we measure that. So there's, I would sort of consider there's almost two sort of success processes. At the moment, our officers, you know, the officers that you're probably working with, they are working to produce the hardware, and there's probably, I would probably think within most local authorities there's that gap of how do we get out there and start telling people about this, how do we start encouraging people to change behaviour, and there's probably, I would suggest there's probably a hole in most local authorities having someone out there promoting that and pushing that. And of course that goes across all the departments, your health, certainly definitely health, education, planning as well is a real key thing.
Thank you, Gwyn. You finished. We're coming on. You mentioned improving routes, so this brings us neatly on to question 5, and Norman's going to ask that one.
Gwyn, do you have any comments or concerns about the maintenance of the cycle tracks?
Maintenance is always an issue. Maintenance does start with really good design at the beginning. When you're actually designing a route in the first place, there's two things that most people forget about when they're designing something. That's maintenance and monitoring, as we've just suggested. That's got to be thought about right from the beginning. Maintenance will always be, if you look at the active travel guidance, it sort of goes on about, is a route safe? So that's like, have we got good road crossings? Is the vegetation cut back, for that matter? Is it well signed? Is it coherent? Is it direct? Is it attractive to use? So is it a nice place to be? So that's quite often a thing. And good, is it comfortable to use as well? So you've got good, clean surfaces. So maintenance is really, really important for encouraging people to get out and do more. My experience using routes in Torvine, I get the impression that the local authorities really, like every local authority, is really stretched for resources. The route sort of between Pontypool and Brynavan always seems to be extremely well maintained. And if someone was saying to me, well, where should we go for a ride, I'd probably recommend that route. The route going south from Pontypool, some of it's quite well maintained, other bits are not so good. I think part of that is a design of the route as well, though. So whereas perhaps they can use a proper road sweeper on the bit going to Brynavan, you probably couldn't use it next to the canal. So I think, and that's where your sort of design thing comes in. But whatever you can do to maintain and sort of constantly improve the routes, that's only going to be a benefit for everyone, I think. And then you've got to go out there and tell people about it as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Gwyn. That's very helpful. We're coming on to the last question. Stuart, do you want to ask that one, please?
Yes, Chair. Finally, Gwyn, is there anything you would like to add that you haven't had the opportunity to discuss with us?
I can say, how long have you got?
5 minutes.
Right. So I think it's a really exciting time for active travel. We've got a Deputy Minister in place in Welsh Government who's extremely keen on this kind of stuff. And over the next 18 months he's going to push it for all it's worth. So I think there's obviously he wants to push things forward. That of course impacts on your officers. So he is going to be asking them to do more and more up to a point. So I think for Torfaen, you've got really good officers. I think they probably need a few more people as well, if that's possible. The other key thing for me is where you see big changes in local authorities or in cities, it's usually somebody really high up that's saying this is what we're going to do. So if you look at and I appreciate the sort of big schemes. So things that are happening in London, so you've got the mayor saying we're going to build X number of routes. The things that are happening in New York, it's the mayor there. So it's absolutely key that somebody really high level within the local authority saying, Torfaen, we're going to have the best active travel routes, and we're going to get people walking and cycling, and it's going to be the healthiest, best place to live. So I think that's key. The officers have also got a number of other challenges coming up. They're probably going to come from Welsh Government. So some of the routes are designed, you're going to have to start thinking about potentially taking away road space and people's parking spaces to produce better routes. So that's a massive challenge. So you've got to be really thick-skinned about that, I guess. And the other things coming from Welsh Government then is they're obviously looking at 20-mile-an-hour zones for all residential areas. They're also looking at pavement parking, which is going to be a really interesting one. Yeah, you can imagine the arguments of that. And I think the really interesting one for me is they're looking at bus regulation as well. So I think with active travel and how you work with buses and trains and how all that joins up, I think that's going to be an improvement for the future.
I got two questions.
Thank you, Gwyn.
Sorry, yes.
Which one? Me or? Yeah. Two questions. One is this year, last year, 70th celebration of Cwmbran Newtown. It's the only new town in Wales. That's one massive, great deal comment in its own right, because it was designed allegedly with cycleways in there. They were very narrow. That's the one of them. The other was, and it's sort of related, is how are we going to fit into the city deal? Because you did sort of mention that to some extent. I see, you said about champions, which is what you've got in London and West Midlands and places like that, people that take forward active travel, but how are we going to get a champion? And the obvious thing to me is somewhere in that city deal set up. And I wonder where you as the campaigning group on that are going to sort of push it in. It's like the slow part of the city deal, isn't it? There's two questions there.
Yeah. Not quite sure how we can. We obviously work with some people within the city deal.
Yeah.
I think perhaps our biggest influence could be the Deputy Minister, because he was a director for Sustrans in the past. Whether we can influence people higher up like that, that's something we're always trying to do from a policy perspective. I think looking at transport and how you're going to affect it regionally, I think the Pontypool station, as I mentioned, is going to be really important. I think there's a part to play within Torfaen about how you get people to travel and how they're using the M4. I think that's a big thing. One of the big things about the M4 is that, you got the short trips and all that, and it's how obviously there's a certain percentage of people that come from Torfaen. Can we get them using public transport, working from home, working locally? I think there's a big aspect of that. So from the sort of city deal, I think those are the two big things for you guys.
The city deal, as I represent the council on the City Deal Scrutiny Committee, one of the major parts of the city deal is the development of the rail network, and things like the new development of one of the biggest hubs, Cardiff City Centre. There's been a huge amount of work done there about shared space and cycling tracks, and actually the design has been incorporating now delineation pathways for people with disabilities. So that's one way that all the councils do think of these things and look at them. So there are opportunities for partnership working between, if you like, the cycling lobby and other groups to make the best of new developments for all citizens. Just picking up on that point, Stuart.
I threw in Cwmbran Newtown because it was designed from the up with it, although like Milton Keynes was, but we forgot about that, haven't we? And I say that because I'm disappointed, but it's great that Pontypool's got that, but Cwmbran's already doing it, and we really need to focus that one as well. I wonder about that. I would say that, wouldn't I? But have you got any comments on that at all?
Cwmbran's an interesting place. I always think of it as it's a town that's sort of cut off by traffic because it's got a racetrack around it. I think it's interesting how what can we do to potentially connect Cwmbran much better. The interesting thing, the one thing I always thought about Cwmbran, because you've got I don't know, I'm guessing it's quite a large proportion of Torvine's population here in the Cwmbran and towards the west of Cwmbran. I've always thought that it would be a good place to run what we'd call a personalised travel programme.
Yep.
So basically that is you ask people, do you want to talk about the way you travel? And they invite someone to come around and talk to them around the house, point out all what for some people are the obvious things, but quite often people think, oh well, how do I get there? And then it's the car's the first thing, and they don't necessarily know about other things. So I think that would be worth looking. A personalised travel programme, certainly for the south of the county, would be worth looking at.
Just take one last question on this session, and then we're going to move on. Ron?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good. I mean, what you were saying just now, we have a Deputy Minister who's very active in active travel, and he'd be pushing this. And I've sat in different meetings listening to ministers from the Welsh Assembly. I never hold my breath, because they're in another world, and they got all these aspirations, they're going to do this and do that, and all they do is say to the local councils, there you are, that's what we want to do, and walk away. But how do we pay for it? I mean, again, and our officers, I know a couple of officers involved in this, they're working as much as they can. I mean, it's all push, and as we're cutting down in times of austerity, and all I would say about the Welsh Government, I never hold my breath with them, because they're in another world, they're not in this world. This is what they expect of the councils, but there's never enough resources to come from it. They expect us to do it, so come out into the real world.
The comment on the Welsh Government. No. We'll leave it there, I think. Thank you for that.
I don't want to comment, but that's what you've done that.
Okay, I'd like to thank you very much, Gwyn. That's been very helpful, and you've given us food for thought, and you've actually given us some ammunition that we can use when we ask our officers some... Now, we're going to invite the officers in a minute, Gwyn. You're quite welcome to leave the meeting, or you can sit there and just listen to what the rest... It's entirely up to you.
I'm probably going to leave the officers to it. Thanks for inviting me today. There's two other things I'd just like to very briefly say. I appreciate I'm running over time a bit. I think it would probably be a good idea to look at some kind of active travel awareness for councillors and officers. I think that's one thing you might want to consider. I think there's massive gains to be made from active travel by looking at the way things are planned and developed, especially with new housing developments. And I'll give you a really good example that has come up recently. The new, is it Lidl or Aldi's on the which roundabout? I can't remember. Yeah, McDonald's roundabout. So for some reason I'd seen the planning application for that. And the walking and cycling path they proposed didn't actually link to the path alongside the canal. So it was about 10 metres of path missing. So it's sort of little things like that, and that makes a massive difference to people who are walking and cycling. So I think looking at the planning system, getting your planning officers on board and giving them the ammunition to fight the developers over active travel and not design things for cars. So there was an interesting article in the BBC yesterday saying we're still designing all these places and they're still car-centric. So we've really got to get away from that.
That's a good note to finish on, Gwyn. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to you.
So I think we'll let Gwyn pack up, and then we need to invite the three officers into the meeting. Well, while we get the officers in, if anyone wants a 1 minute quick comfort break, you can just nip out quickly. We'll pause it. We'll pause the meeting for 2 minutes while the officers join us. Okay, we're going to resume the meeting now, and I'd now like to welcome the officers to the meeting. We've got three officers there. We've got Michelle Mitchell, I'm going to read your titles then, Group Leader, Highways and Transportation. We've got Pat Bates, the Road Safety Strategy Manager, and Mike Panniers, the Senior Countryside, Mark Pannier, the Senior Countryside Access Officer. Welcome to the meeting. Now, we've got a series of questions for you, and we're going to do it in two parts. First part, we're going to look at what we broadly consider to be current infrastructure, and then secondly, we're going to look at future plans. So we'll kick off straight away with the current infrastructure, and I'll start at that end of the table.
Do you want to let Michelle, do you want to
Oh, sorry, I apologise. Yep, I missed that bit. Before we start, I'd like to invite Michelle to give a brief overview of the report. I haven't turned over the page, Michelle, sorry about that.
Presented to this committee, and we're looking forward to hearing your views today. As you're aware, Welsh Government wants to increase walking and cycling throughout Wales, and obviously Torfaen are on board with this too, given that it is cross-cutting against so many service areas and the benefits that it can actually bring. Today we would like to explore what our aspirations are as a council for active travel and how we can take it forward in the future, given that it links to so many policy areas. Active travel places a number of duties on local authorities, and these include the completion of the existing route maps and the integrated network maps. The next iteration of the integrated network map is due this time next year. So actually this scrutiny today is quite important to us, because obviously it's going to help us, pave the way forward for the next 15 years, and we're hoping, you will be able to help us inform where we actually go with that. It's also a requirement to help secure new and improve active travel routes and facilities, and to promote active travel journeys. So given our requirements and that active travel is cross-cutting against so many service areas, a number of questions have been raised in the report in section 4, and we're hoping that today's discussion is going to help us then answer some of these questions. And the main issues for us are based around funding, what factors should be considered when identifying potential new active travel routes, and really how as an authority we can move forward with active travel at a strategic level. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Michelle. We've got, as I said earlier, we're going to start with current infrastructure. We just had a discussion with a gentleman from Sustrans, and he was suggesting that perhaps it would be a good idea if we had an active travel officer. Do we have such a person in the council at the moment?
No, we haven't got a designated officer throughout the council, and this is perhaps something that we do need to consider moving forward. At the moment, it was basically being picked up by Pat, myself and Mark, and doing what we can really to meet our statutory obligations, which we have done so. But I think moving forward, if we do want to make more of active travel, this is something that perhaps we should consider. I know that officers have been recruited in some of our neighbouring authorities. I know Monmouthshire and Newport, they have got a dedicated officer. And it is something that we're actually thinking about now, because we are getting a core allocation of funding from Welsh Government next financial year. And part of that funding is to promote active travel. So we're actually going to explore now with Welsh Government whether we could utilise some of that funding to perhaps consider having a dedicated officer for a period of time, particularly because this year is going to be so resource intense, given that we have to produce the integrated network map by this time next year, and obviously what goes with that, the consultation and so on.
And actually, you mean from April 2020? Do you mean that? Yeah.
Yes,
That's
yes,
fine,
sorry,
fine.
yeah.
That's fine. Okay. Move on, Stuart. Do you want to ask the next question, please?
Have you switch on. Right. Have you considered links with existing infrastructure, e.g. canal towpaths? Is there scope to work with the canal trusts, etc.?
Do you want to take that one, Mark?
Yes, a lot of our current infrastructure is based on the canal. That actually is one of the main spine routes through Torfaen. And so it's not just, it's the current cycle tracks that we use, but we also consider adopted highways, public rights of way. So that's the network that we're looking to utilise for active travel.
Obviously, the word we came up when we were at pre-scrutiny was connectivity, which I gather goes all the way through everything, every conversation I've had on it, or we've had on it. It is that word connectivity, so you've obviously had that conversation as well by the sound of it.
Pick connectivity up under question 4.
Sorry.
No.
Bouncing.
Yeah, jumping ahead. So we'll leave that one for now. But
We leave that one.
yeah, we'll come to that in a sec.
But,
We'll move on, I think, to the next question, and that one can be for Stuart. I think you can ask that one as well.
Okay, I'm in for this one as well. How do you work with community councils to promote active travel? Yes, that is me.
A lot of our funding bids are quick turnaround. We don't know the criteria in advance. It changes every year. So we have limited opportunity to anticipate what the objects would be and then get a bid in on time. So quite often the consultation is among the expertise of the officers and touching with the elected members. Time doesn't permit wider consultation. We would like to do more of that to get more depth, but we work within a timescale that makes that really difficult to achieve.
I did ask Lynn this when we were talking the previous thing about how aware you are of place planning and stuff like that would seem to be an opportunity for you. How aware of that are you on the wider plans that are going on at the moment, because that would seem to be an opportunity for you?
It is an opportunity, but bearing in mind that most of us are taking active travel on as an additional duty, and that now accounts for about 30% of my workload, which means other things are juggling for time. So it's a luxury that we don't have time to accommodate as much as we'd like.
Okay. What I would add to that is that they were fully consulted on the integrated network maps, and of course when we are submitting a bid for active travel, it has to be a route that has been identified on the integrated network map, so there isn't anything new coming from that bid that wouldn't have been on that integrated network map, which they were fully consulted on.
Which will be an incentive for better engagement with community councils and by the community councils in the feedback for the next generation of maps.
Yes.
Stuart, actually, I'm going to stay with you on this question because you raised the connectivity one, so you can ask question 4, and then I'm going to leave you alone for a bit.
No, I'm good. Right, this goes back. How does your work link in with the work being done by the green infrastructure to ensure connectivity across the borough? That obviously links back to all of this, and I think it makes the set of questions sort of work in a way.
Well, active travel is a form of green infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's about trying to take people off roads. So we're looking for those green corridors for people to utilise. So that's where we're looking at. That's where the green infrastructure come from. So we're getting people at sustainable transport. and that's the connection to green infrastructure.
Current bids you've got going in at the moment, they will link some of this, will they? Your mapping will link all this with it, like.
Yes, we're currently working on working up our future bids, but like you say, all those bids, they would have been identified on the integrated network map previously and linking, as you say, with the green infrastructure. Yeah.
Sorry, Stuart, you wanted to come in on an earlier point. I'll bring you in now on that.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to Stuart's question, really, how do you work with community councils to promote active travel? By the same vein, and I hear what you saying, Pat, 30% of your time is taken up answering other areas. How do you promote the active travel for our residents?
It's an area where we know we need to do better, but the resources aren't there to get started on a programme that we don't have the resources to sustain. We do need an active travel officer that can dedicate time to commit to a continuous dialogue with the residents. At the moment, it's down to the principle of communicating with council officer managers and elected members who then, through their dialogue with the residents, we have to multiply our resources by communicating through the elected members, and they take the principles of what we are trying to convey and replicate it throughout the areas and the communities.
Briefly, Chair, do you work with our community team here at Torvine? Sorry, I'll rephrase that question. Do you work with our teams here, the community teams, IT team, to put this forward?
I mean, we certainly did when we went out on consultation for the integrated network map, and also before we construct any route. You know, obviously there's a period of consultation then with the public that we go through and use the teams that we have got available, yes, in Torvine.
Thank you for that. I'm not fully satisfied with the answer, but it's coming back to resources. So.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
They're just going to come in about working with the community councils to promote active travel. Couldn't we just give the community councils some information with reference to links to the cycle, well, the leisure route, things like the community farm could be got to from there, Big Pit, different, the museum, and then perhaps the community council with their resources could publish little brochures to hand out to encourage people to use the leisure routes to walk to these places or cycle rather than taking the car. So is that something we could look at as a council, so it wouldn't cost us anything? We could just pass the information on and see if the community councils would work with us to publish some sort of document and map to encourage people to use these facilities.
Yes, I certainly think that's a very good idea, and that's something that we need to be doing more of, and hence, as you've mentioned in the report, I think there are, various departments which are doing certain things throughout the authority, and we do need to bring all that together. So like you say, linking in with our leisure department, linking in with communities and so on, to really find out what information we've got authority-wide to bring all that together. So yeah, definitely.
Well, the next, Stuart, can you ask the next question, please, number 5?
Yeah. Me, Chair. Are there any conflicts or safety concerns between cyclists and pedestrians? Example, are any of the routes shared space? Because this seems to be coming up quite often where cyclists deem that it's just for cyclists.
Quite a discussion with Sustrans about this, so we'd be interested in your views.
There's two different aspects of shared space. That where you remove typical road markings and vehicles mix with pedestrians and cyclists, and highways and road safety in Torvine have always been against that. And with the lobby of the blind and visually impaired, we fully support their perspective. That type of shared space where vehicles mix with generally is not something that we would want to pursue except in the rarest of occasions, such as under a controlled environment in Pontypool High Street. Shared space where pedestrians and cyclists share a pavement is another type of shared space, and we have an early segregated area cycle route, which, because of the amount of activity from pedestrians and cyclists on it, neither seem to realise what side of the white line they should be on. So we've gone for shared space cycle pedestrian routes, simply because the volume of people are not sufficient to bring any discipline to segregation. So shared space in the context of shared pavements, that's the way we do it. Shared space as in roads, shared, we're not keen on that at all.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. Have we any plans to signpost the shared space to make people aware that it's not only the cyclists that use these areas, there's young mothers with pushchairs, there's dog walkers, and there's lots of users. Are we planning to do anything to bring that message forward?
Yes, we have previously worked with organisations such as Sastrans and the Canals and Rivers Trust, and they do promotion on this, how we share the space. And again, it's just getting people to be aware that it's not just them using it, where they're walking or cycling, there are other people who do use it. And we've had a couple of campaigns in conjunction with Sastrans and Canals and Rivers Trust to get this point across. So it's been promoted. It's been promoted in the national press as well, and we've been involved in that.
Be more specific though. Are we going to be putting in place on the cycleway messages to that effect?
We do have a cycling code of conduct, which is on the website, and when we engage with people, particularly in our road safety roles, we do identify that with young children. And yeah, there is a code of conduct, there is a hierarchy. We haven't so far considered making specific messages on pavements other than the statutory ones that need to announce whether a cycle route is separated or shared, and those are graphics rather than words. Those signs are required at the beginning and end of cycleways, and they are in place. It may be that the general member of the public may not understand the highway code signs that identify whether they're shared or segregated, but they are there at the start and end of specific designated routes.
Do you think there'd be value in putting some in between the start and finishes?
Every additional signpost is also an issue of more infrastructure, more hardware, more opportunities for people to bump into them, cars to collide with them. We have a general trend in highways to reduce the amount of hardware in there. So there's a balancing act to be had, and quite often it's a case that the cyclists or the pedestrians know better but don't do better. So it's not a lack of information, it's quite often a case of choosing not to do what they should be doing. So there's almost a policing element to use the highways and pavements properly rather than an information campaign. I don't think signs with words on are going to change attitudes. There's got to be a discipline brought in, and that's something different to what we've been discussing generally in active travel.
The part I didn't mention, you mentioned about cars on cycleways. That's not the case. There's not going to be cars on cycleways, is there?
No, there's not going to be cars on the cycleway. If I come across with that, it was either a mistake or I've misunderstood you. But no, it's about the shared use of pedestrians and cyclists in potential conflict. We're very keen on the fact that fast cyclists shouldn't be on cycle routes with pedestrians. They should be on the road with cars. Assertive cyclists should be there, and that's what the Deputy Minister has already conveyed to the active travel groups.
Obviously, we've been discussing signs, and you said it's attitude. How do we change attitude then?
Behaviour change is the key. It's a buzz term for the last few years. And unfortunately, at the moment, we do not have in Wales at a national level a behaviour change strategy. Yeah, we have an infrastructure improvement strategy on the design and delivery guidance, but although the Active Travel Act has been in existence for now 5 years, 6 years, no behaviour change strategy that I'm aware of has come forth to address that question. So I can't answer that, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Stuart asked part of my question about the signage, because we've just been told it's very important to have signage to help people understand. So, you know, take the canal towpath. You know, anybody can walk on that, and, you know, bicycles are there. And I got a bit of bee in my bonnet about cyclists, and I did ask Gwyn before, who takes priority? He says pedestrians. Now that's what I understood. You know, when you're walking, the pedestrians would have sort of priority. But what happens is the bikes come whizzing past, ringing the bell, get out of the way. Do you know what I mean? They're not always very polite. And sometimes it's difficult on a canal towpath because they're not all very wide, you know, to get out of the way. Is that right? There should be a priority.
There is a user hierarchy, and pedestrians are at the top of that. Cyclists are advised to ring their bell to make people aware that they're there, but the cyclist should slow down and, if necessary, stop in the case where there are pedestrians, especially with young children and so on. So the issue again isn't what is the hierarchy, but it's how well it's working, and there is in there a discipline that should be with each mode of transport. And again, I can only come back to our experience of training children to cycle, is that they are taught that code of conduct, and as a facility, it's something that we could do better at communicating wide across the area. But whose function is that? That's the question. Is it highways? Is it a social thing? It's everybody's one in some respects, but if it's everybody's, it's also nobody's. But we need to get a broader message across about encouraging cycling and walking, and also how to do it in a courteous manner for different road users.
Perhaps it's something our comms team could take on board and put a publicity drive out about cycleways and leisure trips.
Stuart.
We brought up with Gwyn the London experience on the towpaths up there, but also brought Bath, Bristol cycleway. I forgot to mention Cardiff because they've got a particular problem with it, where they've got I was down there several times, where they've got a very narrow cycleway and a lot of commuters, and it's murder. That's the only word I have, where people go from Whitchurch, the Western Avenue down to the Bay, and you don't want to walk on that one. But we haven't got that. What we do have is, as you said, we've got the canal infrastructure spine, and then we've also got the very good cycleway up to Blind Avenue all the way down to Cabran, which is a different creature. What I'm concerned about, I know your code really well. You said about policing or advisory. I think you've got a point there, to be honest, because I rather like the London thing, and maybe we need someone with a little bit more guts in it. It's nice what you've got, and I think if I'm going to come back to the committee on it's informative. It needs to be put in that a little more polite about the fact that pedestrians, not dog owners with dogs all over the place, but pedestrians walking. And then Gwyn brought up one of the things about a lot of cyclists is they want to make progress. Now, if you're out on the canal in the middle of nowhere, and he said if it's raining, it's brilliant because there's nobody around, so you can make progress. But if you're in amongst a load of dog owners exercising dog in Crossy Hillock, their main use of that path is exercising dogs, and it's rightly so. That's what they're for. So the cyclist has to be aware of that fact, or they're out there for a stroll. So we've got multi-use paths, and it's not there for people going stonking up and down, doing their exercise, and we've got that problem. And it's the only logic to that is to go down the Dutch model, having separate cycleways and separate pedestrian ways, but we ain't got the resources to do that, so we've got to come up with something that, come back to the word you used, policing. So, I mean, where do we go with that? I don't know, other than having one, signs that my colleagues are suggesting, and two, having a bit beefier version of that code we've got. At the moment, that's all we can afford to do, I suspect.
pick these points up, Stuart, when we look
Can
at
we just comment on that a bit? Because I'm wondering whether what we got is strong enough, maybe.
I think the code of conduct is, I think, is due for renewal or review.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that we can look at. How we bring a stronger element of policing into it, not quite sure. But, it's something that we could look at.
It's about being reasonable, isn't it?
It is reasonable.
Yeah.
And it's expectancy of people actually buying into that then as well.
pick up this issue about the code of conduct when we look at recommendations. Just for officer knowledge, 2 of the councillors have to leave at 3, so that's not being discourteous. They announced this at the start of the meeting. So we'll...
Chair, can I just mention one other thing which I forgot? On the canal, other users on there are boaters, which have got a very vociferous group, fishermen and canoeists. So we've got a whole lot of other users which we forget about on that canal, which is well into our borough. Yeah.
On the point that Mark has just made about the code of conduct, could we see sight of that when the new code of conduct is in place?
Hope perhaps we'd be consulted about it.
In the wider context of signage and signs, we are going through a programme now and next year of putting more signs to destinations on there for people who may know how to get there by car but not by bike. So yeah, signage is being implemented right now and has been last year and next year to put more signposts up which will link the communities so that there. But we hadn't until now reflected on information signs about how to use that. But something we need to take on board, as Mark said.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. What are the barriers to active travel in relation to walking to school, and what can be done to deal with these issues?
I think that has been a problem in road safety for decades before anybody even invented the term active travel. School travel plans have been around for 15, 16 years. There is a tendency for people, when asked, to give the answer they think the inquirer wants to hear, rather than the unbridled truth. So it's often the case that people are either too busy or uncomfortable with walking from A to B, even if it's within a walkable distance. So people have their own preferences. It may be dropping the kids off on the way to school. It may be they have a mobility problem. It may be sheer laziness. It might be raining. All these things feed into the decision-making process, and we don't sit in judgment of who does it for what reason. We encourage people to walk. We know that there is a small percentage that will take that message wholly on board and do it, but the vast majority haven't yet had the behaviour change to take it on board. And that is a challenge up and down the country, and more people choosing to walk and cycle will mean there'll be less issues on congestion around schools. It ticks so many boxes in terms of well-being, but people are generally not doing it, and the walk-to-school rates in the national surveys are continuing to fall. I think it fell 10% last year in Northern Ireland in 1 year. So we've got to, first of all, stop the downward trend before we can increase it. So it is a spiralling situation in the wrong direction, and the best brains in the whole of the UK haven't come up with a workable strategy to turn it around.
And again, as we said, I think it just comes back to behavioural change and the promotion then of these routes and what we've actually got out there. So it's about, as we work, how we can work as a council to help aid this.
First, Stuart Evans and Stuart Ashley.
Right. Unfortunately, as we all know, we've closed schools down, so some children do have further, to walk to their schools. We can't do anything about that at this stage, but the complaints we get from people who reside in the school area about the traffic congestion and that, you know, it's getting out of hand, really. I know there's a particular, well, I expect every ward's got particular problems, but how can we get across that it's healthier to walk? Do you know what I mean? To the parents. I know what you said. People are going to work, they'll drop their kids off, you know, to school on the way to work. But it's a huge problem for the people living around the schools, as well as the children not having the healthy walk to school. I mean, I'm sure we all walk to school, all around this table. I mean, not many of us were taken by car. You were, you can see that by looking at me. No, but can anything else be done? Because that's all I've seen is a map where the school is and then a circle around it, and people are expected to walk, you know, within that circle. But you tell the parents that. They don't want to know, do they? They just don't want to know.
It is back to behaviour change, because if something is deemed to be a walkable distance, for argument's sake a mile, then there will be people that will take that on board, and there will be people that will just refuse flat out. And it does come down a lot to who you're accompanying, because a walk for a mile is not far and it doesn't take long, but that's not the case if you're walking a 2-year-old. So it becomes a long journey. So it is all relative, and the Safe Routes, which has been running for 20 years, is about making shorter, more direct, more safe routes, putting crossings on roads and so on. And Active Travel is also taking on board that, and it's producing funding, and there are routes and network improvements. So all these things in terms of infrastructure are being done as quickly as Welsh Government will give us grants to do it. But there is still, on the other side of the infrastructure, the behaviour change to make it happen. We could have more input from public health teams to produce the message. They probably have more experience than the council in behaviour change techniques on health issues. So, but there is so much to be gained from it. It's sad to see so few people be willing to take it up.
And again, it's promoting these routes, so, you know, should be working with schools more, you know, so when they get their intake of children, that we actually put something out at that point to say, you know, this is what you can do, you know, walk your child to school and, you know, list all the benefits for that. So I think, again, it's all around having the resource there to be able to promote what's actually out there to get that message uptake.
Bring in the other councillors. Mark, we seem to have come back again to a behaviour change strategy, and obviously you've talked about it should be part of public health. Where would that start? You know, it should be national government level. You're saying that you've seen nothing out there, but, you know, if it's a blank piece of paper, who should start that process off of developing it?
It's a two-pronged approach that starts from the top. Infrastructure change and behaviour change. Welsh Government did very well at implementing an infrastructure design guide, and that was a good piece of work, but there was a policy vacuum around behaviour change. They really did need to start at the same time, so behaviour change is at the top of the tree in both Wales and the rest of the UK, lagging at least 5 years behind the infrastructure side of things. And, you know, it's not engineers in transport and highways that are experts in behaviour change. That they are other sectors of the council and other ones like public health. So there are other experts that need to come on board and bring their expertise into this area when we can learn from them. But it is a major challenge to bring workable, effective behaviour change policies in, because patently it's not working at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You preempted my next question, really, Michelle.
I think he has, yes.
That's working with schools. Can we do more collaboration to try to encourage walking groups to go to school and alleviating some of the problems?
Absolutely.
I know it's a behavioural change as part as referred to, but I think we shouldn't give up on it.
No, definitely not, and hence why I think, yeah, you know, there is work that can be done there. But again, it's obviously resource is going to be an issue for us then.
If I can just say, walking and cycling was around a long time before active travel. Road safety officers deliver walking and cycling training to schools and have done so since year dot. The council has a statutory duty to train junior school children to cycle. That falls to the Highways Department and the Road Safety Department. And it's been a statutory duty for 50 years. There's not much new under the sun, and road safety officers have a personal relationship with every school in Torvine. They teach curbcraft to every primary school child whose parents permit it to have them, to be able to walk, if necessary, if they find themselves unaccompanied without a responsible adult, to get themselves safely around the community. And we offer the classic cycle proficiency training scheme to every primary school. We don't have much in the way of grant funding to do the national standard cycle training, but the old one was good enough for me, and we offer it to school. It does require a volunteer from the school, either a parent or a staff member, to buy into it as well. But we do make that available. So within part of the job of one's a road safety officer, we're doing as much as we can in that area.
Yeah, just briefly, Chair, and thanks for that part. I knew the curbcraft and the cycling proficiency carries on, and that's good work. But I was particularly speaking about walking routes to school, not cycling. The curbcraft covers a bit of that.
It does, and the road safety officer promotes the Walk to School Week and Walk to School Month. One's in May and one's in October. We offer that to every school with resources if they want them. Some take it up, some don't. We will audit the walking routes if they want to use for a particular campaign, and we will be supportive and nurture an initiative that comes from the school. We won't enforce anything on the schools. You know, it's about nurturing and encouraging green shoots that are coming from the school in there, and that down to the passion of an individual school teacher or head. So we get different reactions according to the motivation of members of staff at the schools.
The nurturing.
Did you want to come in now?
The question I was about to supplement is, in terms of the barriers to why people walk to schools, do you actually get the principal reasons, safety, etc.? Can you have we got a mapping of that sort of stuff, data? And then the other aspect, you know, if you know that, how can you counter it? No, I also put another one in there. I realise what I've said now. Have we done sort of walk to school days? Because I kind of remember this in the past. Certain schools around here have bought little trolley things, haven't they? And they, some of the schools up the road there have actually bought little trolleys and put all their bags in and walked, and they've done that. But we still do that. It's a really good, simple idea.
Well, we don't have baskets and trolleys, but again, the national campaigns twice a year. Yeah. We will support those with initiatives and stickers and so forth, and where it's been required when they're walking somewhere new, a road safety officer can go and audit the route for safety. Yeah. So that there is a degree of what we can do in those areas. But if we come back to what the barriers are, well, a lot of those have been flagged up when the school has done a school travel plan, which every school should do, but not all have done. Yeah. And there is an initiative coming from Welsh Government to make an active travel to school plan rather than a school travel plan. And I've thrown back to them, just tell me the difference. We don't need a 40-page document on about an active travel to school. We just need a few bullet points to tell us how to change a school travel plan to an active travel to school, because, you know, half a dozen bullet points is all we need. We don't need a 40-page document from Welsh Government on it. And they've gone back to think about that.
I remember what it was I saw. It was a walking bus. And basically they had one of those garden trolleys. They put all their bags on, and it was a brilliant idea. They had about 20 or 30 of them. They went to meet at a point, they put all their bags on and walked up the road, and it is overcoming the barrier of them having to carry their bags because they were very small. Simple little ideas like that.
We offer walking buses for those that want to do it. No one's wanted a trolley. They've been prepared to carry their own satchel or whatever. But if that was appropriate and made the scheme work, then we could find the funding for a trolley. The thing, as always, is getting the passionate volunteers to run the scheme and a host school to oversee it. But we have the guidelines bilingually available for anyone that wants an interest, and again, we will nurture interest that comes from the grassroots.
To the next question, which is moving away from schools but still around barriers, how accessible are route maps for people with disabilities?
The route maps, they are available on the Welsh Government website, but I will be honest and say that we as officers even get difficulty sometimes getting onto those route maps. They are available for those with disabilities too, but like you say, how accessible they are at times, because like you say, I know that we get issues as officers just trying to get onto them. We have also got links to those maps on our council website, and obviously we ensure that we cover all groups within that.
It's just, I know from experience that take the blind and partially sighted sector in particular, with traditional mapping, they have great difficulty, and obviously from an active travel point of view, we want to encourage all our citizens, if possible, to use these routes. But it's not an easy issue. I appreciate that. So, okay, we'll move on. Yeah, sorry, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondered, Michelle, if you would had any residents come into the department with routes that they could see put in place would make their life much easier for their active travel. Wondered if you'd had any requests in that regard.
We haven't actually had any requests as such certainly come into my department. I'm not sure about Mark, but when we went out for consultation on the last iteration of the integrated network map, I think we had quite a lot of interest then, and we included potential routes then, which we thought were appropriate. So yes, we've certainly taken anything on board, from the last consultation. And again, that process will happen again now with the next iteration. So when we go out with what we see as our integrated network map, obviously that will go out to members of the public. We will hold public events, and they can come back to us then of routes that they would
Can
like
I just
to.
come back briefly on that, Chair, if I may? So if a resident in a ward came to you and said they weren't able to access an area because there wasn't a ramp there, how would you deal with that?
We would certainly consider that then, and like you said, there's absolutely no reason why that couldn't be included on our integrated network map. Like you say, it's there to pave the way for the next 15 years. Obviously there could be engineering difficulties, but we would have to pick that up in a feasibility. It certainly wouldn't stop us putting it on the map initially, and we can be as aspirational as we want to on that map.
That's my question. Now, I will go down to ward level on this, because to get off of off Mount Pleasant, for example, down from top of Mount Pleasant down to you actually, to get all the drop curves round, you can't go down the hill. You have to go round and about because that's where all the drop curves are. And what I wanted for several residents was a map to show them where all the drop curve routes were. I think you know this one as well, don't you? And it would be very useful to have a bespoke service where you could actually print out a map for residents with powered wheelchairs, for instance. There's several routes you can go, including one of Pat's better routes that was there. Well, the mapping for a new resident in one of those things would be really, really useful service. In fact, Blaenavon, I know Blaenavon as well. There's several routes there which would be useful as well. That sort of bespoke service for somebody if we're talking about serious about this active travel route thing, there's a very useful bespoke service. Stuart picked it up. I'll go with it because I've been actively trying to find that.
I think the overall points to it is really when we're dealing with active travel or any issue that council deal with, there should be accessibility for all our citizens. No, and it's not an easy subject because of cost, but we should always try to do the best. But let the officers come in.
When we build new safe routes and active travel routes, we build them disability friendly. I have put in many routes over the last 14 years, and I don't recall any of those routes having any steps, or at least. But there are many routes that have got steps, and there are many routes that will not be possible to achieve a wheeled access, if you like. You can bump up and down a curb with a mum in a buggy, but you can't do it in a mobility scooter or a wheelchair. I have overseen the design so that we have gradients on all our walk to school routes and all our active travel routes long before the standards required that to be the case. So the network is improving. The routes that we have built, we know where the drop curbs are, but there is probably an inherent infrastructure which isn't documented.
Yeah.
So you would need to audit the streets of Torvine, lock, stock and barrel, to get to a planned route one. And that is a major undertaking which there isn't the officer resource or funding available at the current time.
Your routes that you've done, because I've been involved with some of them, are blessed good, to be honest, because you've got them routed, and I was involved with you on some of them. That route has been praised by the guys in the wheelchairs and some of the limited mobility, because we did that and we made Cwmbran Town Centre at least accessible from different routes. The problem is, and it's a little bit like we need to access those routes, and I've got about 4 or 5 people in wheelchairs I know well. I say, how do I get on them? The usual access thing is to get on the road and go down it. And I've got a problem. Mount Pleasant Hill is a classic example. They get straight on the road, and you see this convoy of wheelchairs, powered wheel buggies things going down there, because they do not want to go down the path, which is where they're supposed to go. They go straight down the road. They reckon it's safer.
I think these are good points, but
Yeah.
I think
No, I only say that because what you said
yeah.
is right there.
on the specific ward issues, I think the best way for
It's an illustration.
yeah, but I think if that's an issue you can discuss outside the meeting with officers.
Look.
I know it's I agree it's an illustration.
It's not a ward issue. This is an issue wherever you want to go in Cwmbran or Blaenavon or anywhere, because I've seen this. I only bring that in as an issue. Linking up to the work that Pat and the company have done is how you access where they've done the good works. Look at this map. You'd still need to get onto each of those access points.
We come back to the other element, that is the core funding that we have for improving the drop curb. There was a drop curb improvement strategy that started at the town centres, then the second level was the local shop centres, and then wider aspects of the community. All 3 phases have been done with a small budget year by year, but we're now up to phase 4, which is the proliferation of new drop curbs that are required throughout the residential communities, and all the old communities are sadly lacking and need it. However, it's not available under grant funding, and the core funding budget is very small, so it will take a generation at the current funding level to improve that lot.
Vaughn, Stuart, you can ask the next question, please, as you raised it in pre-meeting. Number 8.
Yeah. Are there any other grants or funding available, such as from the Cardiff City deal, that you can bid into for additional funds to introduce additional routes? Any other things don't have to be City deal.
Obviously, we can consider Section 106 funding for new developments, and also through City Deal funding as well. There could be potential there. I know in previous years they've looked at perhaps a regional bid for active travel.
Yeah.
I think what they're looking for at the moment are big transformational schemes, because that's what the Minister is actually looking for. So yeah, there are certainly other options, and like you say, we want to explore those further now, as mentioned in the report.
There was an article in the Guardian the other day about new estates, and obviously we've got a few going in at the moment. and lack of facilities, and the 106 that gives us a chance to build in facilities for this. How are we on that?
And again, I think that, you know, forms part of the discussion today and sort of what we want from today, because we recognise that, of course, this is a planning issue. It is cross-cutting, and we need to join up more. And we are getting much better at it. But it's certainly something, like you say, we need to improve on. And hence, you know, we've mentioned in the report about perhaps setting up a working group which is authority-wide. So you will have officers from planning, you know, communities, ourselves and so on, so that we can consider things at a holistic level.
I've got a question Stuart's just asked about funding. I assume we still have the Safe Routes in the community funding. How does that work, Pat? Can you give us a bit of information briefly on that?
The Safe Routes funding back in 2014, we were required to give Welsh Government a list of all the schemes that we thought we'd need to do forever and a day. And they have relaxed the rules since then, so we can introduce further schemes to that 5-year-old list now, which is very generous of them. But the criteria are still quite specific, as they are for active travel route funding, and we need to meet the criteria, and it changes subtly from year to year. So we do have a shopping list of potential schemes which we have to review annually, and then find some which may have qualified under a previous year's criteria. Because the goalposts have been moved slightly, they no longer qualify. But having said that, most of the schemes that we had on our outstanding list of schemes of substance have now been delivered. So we are running down on the list of significant schemes. So there are lots of good things that we could do, but they don't necessarily meet the criteria. You only get the opportunity to bid for 1 or 2 schemes a year, and so you don't want to use up your quota on minor items. However, that can be now considered to be gathered up under the core route enhancements of active travel. So there's more than one way to manage some of these small issues. And to go back to earlier in the conversation, connectivity has been a main word in Safe Routes bids for about 10 years. So, again, nothing new under the sun. It's critical. There are plenty of good isolated routes in Torfaen, whatever you call them, and joining them up has been an objective for Safe Routes initially and active travel as well now. So we're trying to join up what's already there as well as build new stuff.
That part, it'd be interesting to see the potential schemes that you mentioned.
Yes, you mentioned planning. I don't think the planning officers have got, how can I say, the authority to put a lot of these, how can I say, links up into the planning applications that come in. Do you know what I mean? That their hands are tied to the application. If the regulations were changed and the officers could look a bit wider, or if there was an active travel officer in place, he or she could be looking at these plans and seeing where they failed to connect, whether with shops or whatever, because I know there was one in my ward. You're obviously very aware of it. You know, they had to put that bridge, footway over the bridge, the bottom of Sebastopol.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a great cost, really. Very necessary, because the people living there could come out in their cars, but on foot it was dangerous. So, I mean, you know, if there was more regulations or better regulations for the planning officers to look at this before they even come off the application. Do you know what I mean? It would be a huge help, I think, because the developments are built and then the problems come up, you know what I mean? If there was somebody who was an expert at it, would see that.
I think it's fair to say that local councils took on the principles of the Active Travel Act at the early days, and it's percolating through all the departments of the council over a period of time, and which is why this meetings very useful. We do a lot better at being joined up with our colleagues in planning than ever before. And in terms of development control within planning, well, we know that the manager of that sits in the highways group, and Paul and I consult on a daily basis on planning applications, and he's very aware of the opportunities and the limitations on that. But we find the biggest challenge is often with the developers who haven't taken the heart and the spirit of the Active Travel Act. They're looking for the lowest cost option and are quite creative at avoiding the duties that Welsh Government want to put on them because it costs them money. So it's certainly very much on development control and on my radar to get as much commitment from new developments, as is appropriate for the size of the project, to support the Active Travel Act and walk into a school route. So, and yeah, we live in a historic ex-industrial valleys mining town with all the infrastructure challenges that we all know exist, and we have challenged Welsh Government and the Active Travel Design Guidance right from the very first draft in 2014 is how we retrofit those principles into existing valleys communities. It's a major challenge, but they recognise the challenge, and we build what we can where we can when we get the money.
Thank you, Mark. Whose mic is on? Mine now. Thank you, Mark. That's encouraging about the cross-departmental working. The next question is for Stuart Evans to ask, please. Number 9.
Certainly, Chair. Are you using good practice of other local authorities to influence or improve the work being done in Torfaen?
There is a regional active travel board, and Mark sits on that. So we'd like to think that, yes, we are linked up with all the other local authorities in South East Wales, and we certainly like to take the same view when we are consulting. We all get together to make sure that, yes, we are picking up good practice from one another, and that we're all in line with what we do.
I'm not sure if we've...
I think the group is there for consistency, so make sure that we're all acting together on the issues that are brought forward and the problems associated with the Act.
Coming very briefly, Chair, again, is there any possibility then, we work with joint partners now across a lot of service areas, is there any possibility in the future of having an officer that we mentioned earlier, an active travel officer, and have a joint service?
That's certainly something that we have discussed and that we are going to be exploring over the next few weeks, because, as I mentioned earlier, we know that some of our neighbouring authorities have recruited and have an active travel officer, so it could be that it's something that we can buy into there and utilise those service.
Get the rest of that conversation.
The next question, I think we've dealt with it in some respects, is to do with dropped curbs, but I'll ask it. And do we work in partnership with our enforcement officers to ensure routes are kept safe, for example, stopping cars parking on pavements or dropped curbs? I think we've on this already.
As you know, that Torfaen last time we took over civil parking enforcement powers and had an internal resource to target our priorities. Obviously, with the progressive cuts on the resources for the police front line, parking enforcement by and large fell on the wayside, and so with the regime now in place internally, it is people are reminded that they need to obey the law. We're very keen that obstructing footpaths is, to the extent that people can't use them, is completely unacceptable. There is a working group on the WLGA that's been tasked by the Minister to come up with a parking policy. But for us, if there are issues which require enforcement that we can't deal with, that under the powers that we have under civil parking enforcement. Then we have a virtually daily email communication with the neighbourhood sergeant to make them aware of things that they have the powers to deal with if they elect to use them.
I got 3 councillors want to come in now. Start this end.
We were made aware, I won't say where, of obstruction of a certain cycleway when I went out on a visit somewhere, and it seemed quite excessive. I think Norma knows what I'm on about. And I wonder, do you actually take evidence from people to actually patrol these cycleways? Because this was obstruction and used as a car park. The local councillor was aware of it, and it struck me that was an issue that we didn't have the enforcement team at the time. I don't know how we enforce it, and there are issues at times, cars parking on them. I don't know how you I know where it is, and I'll tell you afterwards if you like, but I'm not going to mention it at meeting. It does seem there from time to time there are issues like this. This one was the most extreme example I've come across in the borough. And I just wonder how you enforce something like that, because it seemed that this was going on for quite a while and no one had actually taken any action against it.
Can I come in? I think Mark's partly answered that question. They do everything they can with civil enforcement.
No, this was
but and then the other issue is criminal enforcement with the police is tricky.
No, this was none.
And there are gaps in the coverage.
Yes.
The police have certain powers, particularly with obstruction, but that requires a full police officer rather than a PCSO.
Yeah.
And again, the remit for our civil parking enforcement probably doesn't cover cycleways. Probably doesn't. I would have to check with our team leader, but my gut feel is that it doesn't cover cycleways. It's outside their remit, their scope of authority. But we can get back to you on that.
Member Major, I'll let you know where it was, but I'm not going to. It's confident, data protection Act. I would take that issue, but in terms of where it was, and it will work. I have seen it elsewhere, and how it's dealt with. Obviously, from the police point of view, it's not the thing they want to be dealing with. Whether that's an issue for them, it does seem to be a gap in the law as regards what they are.
Discussion outside the meeting. No, it's a good point. Yeah, no, good point. Yeah. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm glad to hear that we are working with our enforcement team on issues and with the police as well, as you pointed out, Pat. Because my particular beef is, and I know there's guidance going on about parking on pavements, and that's going to come forward shortly. But my particular concern is the money that's been spent in all wards in Torvine and the safe routes in the community, and they've been flouted and regularly parked on. And in some instances, they've been near very, very fatal injuries attached to them. By the grace of God, that hasn't happened. But is there anything we can do to try to work closer with the police on this issue?
Well, we do have a virtually daily conversation with the neighbourhood sergeant, and in some of the ward offices where we have a contact with them, and where they have powers to enforce, we do share that information, but we can't be telling them how to do their job. If it is something that our civil parking enforcement people have powers to deal with, then that fits within the highways group, and they can be directed, assigned to look at problem areas along with their default regimes that they do for around the borough. But we would seek to address that either within the powers that the council have through CPE, or by communicating not just the fact but the urgency of the matter to our colleagues in the police. But if it's with them and not with us, the onus is on them to prioritise it alongside their other challenges. But I, having built cycle routes and safe routes, I am highly unimpressed when people use it as additional car parking. It gets my goat.
And perhaps we can have a conversation outside this meeting.
I think it's been covered, parking on pavements, and the authority that we have to contact to stop this. As Pat said, if they have a mind to do it, they'll do it. But the police, well, I've said the police now, they have told me that perhaps it's better for the cars to be parked half on the pavement to keep the roads clear. And I can't see the logic in that at all.
Stay with that. Some of the police are now engaging with the Welsh Assembly's task group on parking on pavements, and that's likely to report this year.
Yeah.
I was going to make a light-hearted comment and say the only comfort is, and I've seen them, the police are now mounted on bicycles and going up said Canal Bank and think fairly regularly, which is, I think they're going to encounter problems, so they will know about it, won't they? I've noticed our local PSSO and policemen on bicycles, which is quite good in a way. They now see the problem.
You don't see them in Glenallen.
Right.
Yes.
And they've even got an electric bike, apparently, one of them. But in all seriousness, if you can get a mobility scooter or a wheelchair or a double buggy on along a pavement where there's extreme parking pressure and narrow roads, that will allow a car to park partly on the pavement so a fire engine or a dust cart can come past, that may be a situation that we have to live with. But we should not be obstructing vehicles from the highway, and we should not be obstructing all users, including the ones I've just mentioned. So if we can find an accommodation between those two extremes, then that is maybe what the WLGA will conclude in their report later this year. But I have no qualms about having people who are willfully blocking the pavement dealt with in the severest manner.
Councillor carries a tape measure for that very purpose, because what you say, if it's a metre or so wide and you can get a double buggy down there and you can get a motorised wheelchair down there, it's sort of tolerable, that's a good word.
Tolerable.
In terms of the parking on pavements task force that the Welsh Government are looking at, they are looking at, not blanket ban, they are looking at potential exemptions, and I'm sure there's full discussions going on with councils about that. No, there is. We've got one last question on current infrastructure. I'll ask that, and we need to quickly move on then to future plans. The last question on the first bit is, do you feel you get enough support from Welsh Government in this area? I don't know if Pat's going to answer that. Well, Michelle?
Yes, I mean, certainly in terms of the funding streams, and like I say, the funding that we have received over the last few years, as you will see in the report, is in excess of 2 million. So yeah, I would think it would be unfair for us to say that we don't get that support. And like you say, moving forward, there is an active travel fund as well available. And the Minister has said that he's got longer term plans for that. So I think, yes, I think the support needs to be around, I know we're going to say it again, but around more of the behavioural change and the work that needs to go there. But in terms of infrastructure improvements, I think, as an authority, we have done very well.
We've punched above our weight in terms of receiving grant funding on safe routes since the scheme first came out in about year 2000. We've had over £6.5 million of improvements over that. I know it's nearly 2 decades, but that was money that was not available from any other source to make either significant or small incremental improvements around most primary schools over that period of time. So I think we've done reasonably well out of Welsh Government, because we had needs that we were able to convey and they prioritised them against other councils.
Now, the future plans, and as a committee, we were very impressed with the officers we've got helping with this issue. So this first question is around that subject. Do you want to ask this one, Stuart?
Yes. Right.
Number 12.
I know it is. What succession planning do you have in place to ensure the expertise of officers isn't lost?
Perhaps that's one for Michelle, I think.
Michelle, yeah, and you know, we've lost a couple of officers that I don't think are Andrew Neville, but we were thinking of, you know.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we are conscious of this at the moment, and actually it was a discussion that we had outside of the meeting before we actually came in. So I think over the over the next few weeks, this is something that we are going to discuss, you know, sort of moving forward, because we can see the focus becoming, I suppose, heavier really on active travel, and we recognise that we do need that expertise there, and like you say, it's pretty much a role that's been split between the three of us to date, so we do need to start sharing that knowledge and perhaps bringing more into.
Evan, do you want us the next one, please, number 13?
How do you advertise and encourage use of the new routes?
If you want to answer it briefly.
Yeah, and again, I think I think we've been honest here, and we have said that there has been limited, really. I mean, when we are constructing a new route, obviously we do consult with members of the public, and I think it's pretty much that's where it's at the moment. And then obviously the work that Pat does through the schools. So I do think that there is, you know, a large piece of work there that we need to start thinking about and to do moving forward if we are going to see this change.
Yeah, you say you consult, and you consult with the comms team and they put it out there. Do you do any paper signage of any sort? Because not everybody uses IT, do they?
No, I mean, Pat holds public consultations events, don't you, Pat, on your safe route schemes?
On our safe route schemes, we'll do drop-in events to convey and communicate what we're doing and to see whether there are any peripheral refinements that can be done. You can't win, because if you tell people what you're going to do, they'll say it's not a consultation. If you don't tell them what you're going to do, they'll tell you that you're not talking to us. So quite often the key aspects have got to meet a grant criteria, but what you're looking is local knowledge to add quality to what you're doing, or in case we overlook something and there is a showstopper that we need to address. But we do have drop-in events. They normally have a robust conversation. Unfortunately, the numbers are fairly low. You might get 20 people, 30, 40, if you're lucky, at an event in a community of 5,000. Those are the numbers that want to come out of the door to come and hear or make a point. But again, we need to multiply our resources. I email councillors and community councils on the schemes, and I rely on the surgeries that happen by the elected members to pass that information on. We can't communicate with 90,000 people. We do multiply. It's like we reach every child in school by getting through the head teacher. It's their job to replicate that through the staff and so on. So we use the existing infrastructure and the hierarchy to actually pass that message on. And I'm happy to engage on safe routes or active travel schemes where there's a big public interest about how it's going to work, and tell people that we need to move away from a car bias to more equality with walking and cycling, which is not a message car drivers often want to hear, but it has to be conveyed, and that's part of behaviour change.
Just glad that you carry out that alongside your comms team and what have you.
I think there's a very big opportunity here which maybe we haven't grasped, because I'm probably as guilty. When you put these routes in, there are charitable routes down the canal, charitable cycle rides down the canal, which is natural. But what we don't do is do awareness raising or even a fundraiser around the routes that we've got in Cwmbran or the Blaenau. There's very little route things going on, and I suspect that maybe what we need to do is a couple of events, one on the Blaenavon run, because there isn't one as far as I know at the moment, and one on the Cwmbran sets. Maybe put something on. This is your, maybe a fun event, and coincide it with something like the big event and something with the part. It's just a simple event, and maybe involve the community councils as well. Just a suggestion, because at the end of the day, that's the best publicity of the lot. And you get some people out there, make it a fun event and a bit of a charity fundraiser. I'm only suggesting it.
It sounds like a great idea.
I'm not asking yourself to even organise it.
Well, exactly.
No.
It's a great idea, but
But
my
this is what
question
this
is,
new office
what is
is.
the most appropriate department of the council to run that?
I don't know.
Where, again, where active travel and so forth is across, it is a cross-cutting issue.
I realise that.
And, I'd go along and say, that's a great idea. I mean, the code of conduct for cycling, we used to promote that when we had a road safety stand at the Cumbrain big event and at the Pontypool Park. So they do overlap, but we are few, and we've now got additional duties. So we need a core active travel officer to be able to run with this.
You do, but I'm kind of reminding myself to come back to you on it in a way, but because at the end of the day, you put all this amazing amount of infrastructure in place, maybe we need to use it as highlighting that, because it's there. I'm just an opportunity there, maybe.
It's on the to-do list, but you don't ever get to the end of the to-do list.
If I can come in here, Councillor Giles Davis in our pre-meeting raised an issue about encouraging new routes, and he was suggesting that we ought to have cycles to rent at the start and end of a route, which is sort of infrastructure. I mean, he's not here to ask that question, and I just feel guilty if we don't raise it. So, Pat, I don't know if you've got a thought on that. You did.
I'm not the expert in this area. There is a set-up cost to do that, but if we felt it was beneficial, it is something that the Active Travel Core Fund enhancement could be used to bid for that facility. But there's maintenance, there's management, there's storage, there's servicing, there's ongoing costs, and maybe they'll languish in a shelter 99% of their time. I don't know. We would only know if we try.
First, I think, Stuart, and then I'll bring the council.
Just going back to the regional meeting they attend, I know there's a pilot scheme going on regarding hire bikes, so something that we can look at, and whether it's something that we can do in Torvine, we don't know, but at least we can take on board the findings from that pilot.
Perhaps from our perspective, when we look at recommendations, that we review this in the light of the pilot being something we can talk about later. Thank you for that, Mark.
I just say, I know Richard Dommett in the canal, the Mononbrec Canal Trust, has sort of put in something in at Goitra, and the obvious place is Goitra Wharf to something like Cumbrain Stadium or the Polk, and that would make sense. And the other one I came up with, and it's sort of related to this, is if there was a water taxi available from Goitra to Pontymoyle, you can get people walking, because if you relate that to public transport as well. I'm only saying this because we have a very slow. Mononbrec have got their own boat, but it only does 1 mile an hour. Unfortunately, getting that they've tried it already, getting it up to Pontymoyle. But if it's a bit faster, 4 miles an hour, you could have a water taxi from Goitra up to Pontymoyle. You can actually get people walking, but that's not active travel, that's leisure travel we're talking about. But the idea of a water taxi when we get the canal reopened all the way through makes a bit of sense, because you don't want to, if you can walk from from Cumbrain to Pont, we're talking about active. That is a form a lot of people do. They actually do walk between Pontypool and Cumbrain. Quite a lot of people do, and go back on the bus. So there is a route there can be promoted for healthy living. That's something we have not looked at really seriously, but a lot of people do actually do that. I do it occasionally. So there's a lot in this, more than maybe we're looking at.
The one thing that we haven't touched on is the fact that a lot of people will walk and cycle for active travel.
Yeah.
But a lot of people will walk and or cycle for leisure, and so the leisure aspect fits very well with the well-being bit. It's not picked up, and it won't be picked up under active travel, because I asked the Deputy Minister that direct question, and he says, no, it's not under the definition. So we need to be mindful what we're asking when we're collecting data. Are we asking about what the health of our people, because of the amount of activity, even if they're walking the dog, which doesn't qualify as active travel, or do we just want the numbers for the Minister for his flagship project?
Can I say one thing? If you want to go from Cwmbran Town Centre to the new Lantern Park police station, the quickest way is straight down the drive. It's even my bad leg. It's actually a 20-minute walk. It's much quicker than taking a bus. And in fact, one thing we haven't looked at is that whole drive. There could be hopefully a lot of people doing that rather than taking cars down there, because the car parking at the new police station in Lantern is something we've discussed quite a lot on Cwmbran Community Council. How are they going to get all that parking down there when there's a lot of stuff down there? So that whole route of Cwmbran Drive with its little path on it is quite a useful corridor. And this is part of what we're talking about. And I did bring up the fact that 70 years of Cwmbran Newtown, and in fact that was the original system that you based quite a lot of your Cwmbran route on, wasn't it?
Well, we need to make sure that Cwmbran Drive is clearly on the INM, if it's not already, although... but more to the point, we have already bid for, and are bidding again, to substantially improve the connectivity between Oakfield and Lanternum Industrial Park, including to the new Gwent Police Headquarters, through the playing fields beside where the 3G pitch is going.
Yeah.
So that has already been bid on 2 previous occasions for an active travel substantial upgrade. Yeah, well, we're proposing a new walking and cycling bridge where the skinny bridge is.
Okay.
So it's on the wish list, and it will be bid again, because we see that as a very valid improvement, which will also help reduce the congestion outside the new Lantern Community Primary School. It's a win all round, that particular one. It's on the shopping list.
Thank you, Chair. I hear what you're saying, Pat. Some of this is outside your remit. It's more or less a sports development part of it, where the bikes are properly concerned. I just wanted to say, Mark, I'm glad that conversation is being taken. Will you be considering wheelchair users, something, facility there for them? Electric bikes, have you thought anything about that?
Well, that will be part of the scheme. That will be part of the pilot scheme. So it'll be pedal cycles, plus there'll be the electric cycles as well. That will be a part of the scheme. So it's something, as I say, we can look at when the report from the study comes out.
When is that expected? Any idea?
They're going through it now. As I said, they've got funding to do it. I think it's kicking off from April onwards. So when we got some information, we can report back to you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
I was just interested that you mentioned statistics. And there's a question on here, we might as well jump to it now as you've raised it. The report suggests that there's little statistical data to provide evidence the active travel is working in Torfaen. Do you think this is important to do, and what suggestions do you have? The reason I'm asking that is, obviously this is premedicated on Welsh Government funding, and normally they want evidence of how effective their funding is being. So I just wondered how we measure it. I mean, is the measure of success that we're developing new tracks, or is the measure of success somehow as usage increased? I mean, you were talking earlier about car use has increased tenfold. Do we have any evidence that cycling and walking is improving or increasing? They're the sort of issues that we were pondering when we were discussing this in our pre-meeting.
Well, we know that the national measures for walk to school are going in the wrong direction. And I sit on the Active Travel to School National Group, which is hosted by Public Health Wales down in Cardiff. I'm knee-deep in public health people, and myself and one other are the only people with that can relate to transport. So we have to bring them back to reality quite often. But we are challenged with actually turning that criteria around. So it's something that we need to stop the rot and to get the increase. And you need the infrastructure in place. There is a saying that if you build X, whether it's a motorway or an active travel route, people will use it. And that will be the case. Just like the safe routes, people will use them. But Welsh Government are now seeking all new schemes to have automatic counters on them to measure activity levels. How we deal with seasonal variations, I really don't know in that, and how many years that we need to collect data to get a trend before we can find meaningful results of it. Because if we're just getting snapshots of data, when we can find a little bit of money to either collect data from counters that are already there, because there is no core budget for it. We also find some of the infrastructure we put in to collect data gets vandalised, it's maliciously attacked and destroyed. Sometimes the batteries wear out because we haven't found any money to collect the data and refresh them, and so on. So we have a very sporadic amount of data, but it is something that we do need to do better. And now with the core route enhancement funding stream, it seems to be coming through. Last year, this year, and then hopefully as a regular trend, we will be looking to build a regular monitoring regime through that, to update what we've got, to refresh the counts, to analyse the data. We need to talk to potential partners of doing that. There is a cost to it. It may be able to be grant funded in the future. There's an opportunity to get more concrete data for the network usage. But the principles of walking to school, coming back to that, it's still got to turn the tide from a declining usage level.
Seems a very sensible approach to me, thank you. Put my mic on. We'll go back to question 14, Norman. We don't seem to pick on you for the schools questions, but we'll, if you wouldn't mind asking it, please.
Okay. It's not my question, no.
No, it's not your question, but...
14. Are there any plans for more safe school routes to be developed?
I am open to receive requests for meaningful improvements to any school route in Torvine. I have a wish list, and I'm looking to add quality improvements to it. So let me know. Every year we analyse, we prioritise, we select a bid. There must be routes out there I don't know about, although I do know every school personally and the areas around them. But I'm looking for information for further improvements to add to our list to go forward, so that we can carry a body of schemes that we want to improve. Sometimes we get requests which I can't find any substance for, so we can't progress them. But if there are schemes that are going to make walking to school safer, whether it's infrastructure, missing gaps in pavements, new pedestrian crossings, the Safe Routes to School scheme is great value. And yeah, let me know of any schemes that I may not have noticed, please.
We'll move on to question 16. Stuart Ashley, do you want to?
Is there anything more you could feel that could be, or can be, or should be done to contribute to the acts such as the Environment Act or Planning Act? Have you got that one?
Again, I think this comes back to having an authority-wide sort of active travel working group where you have got the expertise then from all the different areas. So we have got that joined-up thinking.
Yes, I think we covered that in the earlier discussion, yeah. There's two more questions now on the agenda. We've already dealt with the question about Section 106 money, so I'm not proposing that we touch on that again. And to be honest, the last question we've dealt with it in the last answer, really. There was a question about a holistic and innovative approach to active travel across the authority. If members are content, I think we've more than covered that question. So that's the end of our questions. So I for all their time and effort today. It's been very helpful. And thank you very much on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
Before you go, there's anything else you want to add? But
No.
Just bear in mind, as I say, we are going to be starting the review of the integrated network map. So as we talked previously about routes, if you know of any routes that you think would enhance the network, then please let us know. And then we can consider those, put them on the plan that will go to for consultation. So if you are aware of any routes, then yeah, please let us know. Okay.
okay, good. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to leave the meeting now. I'll just pause for a second to let the officer. Yeah, okay. Should we have a 2-minute pause, Chris, of the meeting, just while the officers leave? And is it on? Yeah. Okay, members, we're back on the webcam, so we'll resume the meeting. My next item on the agenda really is to update you. Yeah. No, we've got to do that first.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So I got to update the committee with comments we've had from the public via Facebook. On this occasion, we've only had one single comment, and that was, leave the lights on until 9 p.m. so that we can safely walk in the evenings. No, yeah, I'd like to thank the member of the public, if they're watching today, for feeding that in.
Can I, if you like, I'll come in on that.
Yeah, do you want to come in, Kath?
I received that comment that came through the comms team yesterday, and I did the same as you, leave the light on until 9 o'clock. I was a bit unsure, and obviously with Facebook you don't get the detail, or you don't know, what place the people are talking about. So I spoke to the Highways Department this morning in order to try and get you some clarification, and obviously if the member of the public is watching, they can understand as well where we're coming from, because it isn't exactly safe routes. It is more a highways and transportation area, but there's a crossover. So with regards to the question relating to street lighting, there are currently 7,091 lights which are switched on. 4,732 are partially lit. So they're switched on between 12:30 and 5:30. So 12:30 in the night until 5:30 in the morning. And then, and then switched off. And then 1,796 lights which were decommissioned in 2009. The decommissioning of these lights saved the authority £600,000 per annum. But prior to the decommissioning of those lights, risk assessments were undertaken for each site, and no lights were switched off in the following instances: streets with traffic calming provisions, areas with high numbers of accidents, controlled pedestrian crossings, central pedestrian refuges, roundabouts, junctions, areas where columns are situated in positions that could become a hazard in the footway or verge if unilluminated, rural areas with narrow roads and or no footways, and schools. And then the community safety criteria was no lights decommissioned in areas where there is a factual police evidence of antisocial or criminal behaviour at night, commercial premises with a record of business crime, or streets covered by public CCTV. And finally, the social impact they considered: no lights decommissioned adjacent to hospitals, medical centres and surgeries with 24-hour services, areas to a high proportion of elderly residents in sheltered accommodation, public facilities, areas with existing limited lighting, commercial premises, bus stops and public transport. Furthermore, there are generally no more than 2 lights off in a row. So I just wanted to give an overview of the lighting situation. I'll forward it to you. So I did think it was very interesting, and I think it gave an understanding to the discussions about the lights, because we've no more information than that one line. So if that person is watching, that's information for them and for you as members, so you understand the answer to it. So I don't know if that's helpful, but
Thank you for that, Kath. Stuart, you want to come in?
Yeah, could I also add that if you're a regular night cyclist, which I had been up until a few years back, that some of our urban cycleway, and I don't mean Blind Haven or places like that, but places where you've got cycleways and paths going through urban areas like Cwmbran and Pontypool, there are lighting on some of it. Not the old railway path, but some of the canal bank and some of the, it's actually got lighting on it. It makes it a lot easier. The other aspect that Pat said about white lines, not for the purposes of segregation, but for the purposes of navigation, a white line on a cycleway is actually a very useful device, especially to make sure you don't fall in the canal. It is actually, for point of navigating at night, because the canal's very dangerous. So certain aspects of night navigation on cycleways is really useful.
Okay, I think
I do, especially where they hit junctions as well.
Thank you for that, Stuart.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a fairly comprehensive answer, and I hope the member of the public, if they are watching, they feel reassured that we do take seriously any comments that we receive via Facebook. Thank you for that. Okay, members, now we'll move on to thoughts on formulating our recommendation. Now, in the report, Kath has reminded me that the officers asked us to consider a number of questions. So I'm going to hand over to Kath. She'll go through those questions, and I think it'll help us formulate our recommendations. So over to Kath, please.
Okay, members, if I can draw your attention to 4.2 and the next few points from there. So in the report, Michelle is saying that they're looking to try and forward active travel in Torfaen, and there were a number of questions that they felt once you listen to all the answers given, you might be able to give your viewpoint on, which will help them. So if we go through them one at a time, you can give your view, and then at the end you can give your formal recommendations as well, which you will have come up with as we've gone through the meeting. So I don't know if you need me to read out all of it in its entirety, but the 4.2, the question is, if external funding is not available in the future through the local transport fund, should funding be identified for active travel internally? I mean, it does say in the paragraph, unlikely but cannot be dismissed.
Can I come in first? I mean, one of the issues that definitely cropped up in this committee meeting today was the need for an active travel officer. And I believe that hopefully that will be funded with external money, but if it wasn't, we either fund it directly internally, or we look at, as you suggested to it, partnership arrangement with other local authority. But it will mean that there needs to be some resource going into that.
I think it came up in discussion time and time again, and I think we need to actively seek it. I'm sorry, a pun, but proactively think it rather than proactively seek an active travel, because the officers there, it's percentages of their jobs, and none of them are doing it.
Yeah, I totally agree with the comments that you've made, Stuart. I mean, we need an active travel officer, don't we? Because 30% Pat Bates of his time is going. It's a department that's struggling with resources anyway, so I fully endorse that.
My own view on it, and I know you raised the partnership question, but what came out in this meeting today was the need for the link across the departments within Torfaen.
Yeah.
So I'd be minded to push for our own internal officer on this, simply because, I mean, we've had partnership work with enforcement with dogs and things in the past. It hadn't worked. The insider will have a better opportunity, I believe, to link internally than a partnership. But either would do. But if we had a choice, I'd go for the in-house option.
Ideal solution would be having in-house. Totally agree.
Can I also say?
Can I just say that if that isn't possible, that we look across boundaries.
Okay. The officer that wasn't there was, which I did mention by name, was the landscape architect as well, which that was the post that was proactive in a lot of this, as well as Pat Bates, and it's important we actually that one post down as well.
And I felt that the need for an active travel officer, there seemed to be unanimity across this committee today. Norma?
I agree with that entirely. But it was also pointed out that we could do a signage.
No, Yeah.
You know, Gwyn pointed that out, how important signage
That's the role
is,
of the town.
and it's lacking.
Sorry. What I was going to say is, if we go through the questions and this fit into that particular question, we'll go to the rest. Then when we come to the end, we'll go through all the other things, and I've also got that down as signage, but it's not a direct answer to the questions in 4.2. Should we come back to it? Is that okay?
In a minute,
Next
Norma.
question.
Okay, so this is saying, in the interest of all Torvine residents, should any other factors be considered when prioritising routes, e.g. topography or vicinity of amenities? Because it's saying the Act states improvements to walking and cycling routes should be prioritised in favour of routes likely to give the greatest impact on increasing rates of travel.
Connectivity. What did you get in that respect?
Connectivity definitely came out.
And Gwyn also brought up a bit about the spine and the essential nature of that spine in terms of making it wider, because that does seem that everything connects in. That's what feeling I got from it.
Yeah, the other thing that came up as well that he mentioned was trying to keep pedestrians separate to the cyclists as well. That would be an ideal solution, really, if it was
Well, we're not going to get that.
Talking here about the INM, that's the new routes, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we need to focus on, from the officer's perspective now on the future here. So the priority is, I think, connectivity, so it's about the future. Now, the looking again at safer schools was one for the future, I think. We need something in there about that, but the ball was passed back to us with that, in a sense, that, you know, if we've got any ideas, we should feed them in.
We only know our own schools, if you know what I mean. It should be opened up to the whole council if he's asking for that. But
yes, there will be a consultation on this, Norma, so it'll be done via that.
Well,
Yeah. Stuart?
I was going. The next
sorry.
cross-cutting scrutiny is going to be going to be global warming, etc. When we get that, can I just say, when we get that, the whole business of using vehicles to take kids to school is a big no-no. It's going to have to be.
They're up to Norma then. Norma?
So can I just finish that, because it's the well-being of future generations is that the health well-being side of that sort of thing is going to have to be, as much as possible, we encourage people. We can't not do that, can we?
No, sorry, Norma.
I was only going to say, vicinity of amenities. Well, if there are amenities, we need to access those on foot as well as cars, because car parking spaces are at a premium, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? All the amenities that are in Torvine should be accessible on foot or by bike, or rather than vehicles.
Connectivity again.
Yeah,
pretty normal.
So I mean, you know.
So we're definitely going to have a recommendation around connectivity.
The other aspect which comes up big in here is about air quality. But you don't want cars around schools if you can. It's got to come back to all of that. And that's where the global climate change stuff comes in as well. We're going to discuss that. But one thing we don't want is cars and all the rest around it, where we're getting silly local journeys, because all our schools are getting that. And I think we understand the safety issues that parents have. I certainly do. We see that all the time. But we need safe communities, you know, the rest of it.
We need to work through these very quickly. So the next one was, how can Torvine ensure the active travel is recognised by all areas? Should an authority working group be set up to address active travel? I would say yes to that. Yes. Yeah. Kath?
Yeah, I felt sure that you would say yes to that. And as we've been working through quite a lot of the information that I've picked up there should be an authority-wide working group. And I don't know whether we can sort of look at more than one answer to the question there. Yes, the answer is definitely yes. But in the next question, they're talking about how we can make it more realistic and wherever. And it's making sure that this group is put together and is formed to help do that. But, you know, that needs to be done with formal terms of reference. It's not something that we just talk about and then ask people to turn up to and we don't really know why they're attending. You know, if it's going to be something that they think is going to be able to help this going forward, and the number of service areas that were listed today, you know, within, you know, our own council that can be used, I think to look at that and from it try to bring out the statistical stuff that you were raising, because
this is just an aspiration most probably, but can we ask about the possibility of an active travel champion?
Ideal person for that would be the active travel.
Yes.
No, I be an active travel champion
sort of
in tandem with the active.
Yeah, with that, are you talking about a councillor there, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No one else.
Views?
I totally agree. We should have.
Norma?
It depends, doesn't it, on who the person is and how much knowledge they've got of this topic.
if they attend
I don't-
the active
Yes.
working group, they become more
I don't see
knowledgeable.
any harm in having an active travel champion, to be honest, so I think we'd say yes to that then.
Yes,
Please.
okay.
Okay. And just talking about the holistic approach in the terms of reference, when we had the meeting, there was quite a discussion around the planning, involving planning and how it's not possibly working as well as it could at the moment. There was quite a lot of talk about health. Now, okay, we're talking about public health, but we've got health and social services within in the council. So I think there's a lot of scope for this working group, and it needs to be holistic. So yes to that. The last one, and Kath, we'll come back to you in a second because we got loads. Sorry, Stuart, go on then.
I mean, some time ago, I know there was a facility here that you could use bike to travel to council business. Not only councillors, I'm referring to employees as well. And then there was a shower facilities as well. And I wondered whether we need to perhaps revisit that.
What the next one, Stuart, just to read it out. In order to address the Minister's aspiration, should Torline continue the duties contained within the Act, and what you just said, Justin, there, seems to chime with, or go a step further and be all more aspirational moving forward.
Step further.
Well, yes.
Step.
The authority bought some bikes. They bought a couple of Bromptons. They promptly disappeared. And then the other bikes that nobody wanted to use hung around for a long time down there. And it sort of died to death. The one aspect of it that everybody wanted never actually happened, which was a tax relief scheme on buying bikes. I don't know what's happened to that. We need to ask what's happened to that.
Lots of companies.
Been on that. Did you?
Yeah.
Did you know what the answer to that was, Kath? Christine suggests you've got a scheme.
Chris and I both think that there is a scheme in
No, the
place.
scheme hasn't happened.
It's not, is it?
No. The leader wants to.
Should we? I won't use the word. Yeah, we'll ask for that to be checked. All right, because.
I know what the answer
All right,
is.
but we're not going to sort that out now. We haven't got a huge amount of time.
If you're going to encourage people in the workforce to...
Yeah, well, if we ask that, we can ask that question. But just going back to Stuart's point about operational, I think the answer to that is yes, and we could give what you've just suggested about encouraging cycling with council employees. Could more be done on that?
Yeah.
Kathy, I don't know how we're going to word that, but that's just one example.
We should be doing it all the time.
So that's Kath, do you want to add anything to, because we've gone very quickly through those points, and I know we've got a number of other things that we discussed, which we probably want to put in as recommendations in the report. So I'll let Kath finish writing. We've got a few things to add.
We're going to.
No, yeah, we have, and we're not going to miss anything. Don't worry. But You can only write at a certain pace.
Doing very well there.
Okay, right then. If we go back to Councillor Parish's comment from earlier about the signage, Pat was saying that there are pictorial signs in place at the start and at the end of routes, but they are the statutory signs, and then he did say afterwards, never actually considered that, you know, some form of wording around conduct could be useful. So as well as the signage, the other thing around conduct that came up on more than one occasion was around this code of conduct for our cycleways, and he's saying be more specific about that. So I've got it there, I've got it somewhere else. Code of conduct for cyclists, in place but not always applied. Mark then commented to say that he's pretty sure that shortly it's due to be reviewed. And then from there we talked about a publicity campaign that could be run to promote this. So shall we say something in the line of code of conduct and signage as one recommendation? Yeah?
Alongside, sorry, Mike, if I may, Chair, alongside that we also need, we need to find out about enforcement issues, because that's something that we got something about, what the status of cycleways, stroke pedestrian-ways, whatever you want to call them, are, because we've got that issue with...
Yeah, I think rather than a recommendation, that will go in the notes to the meeting. Yeah, we'll have that as an observation, a question and the observations.
Yeah.
We're not making a recommendation, we're seeking clarification there.
But this one, the one you're on about is the London Canal and cycleways. I think Mark's on board with that. He knows about that, I suspect. Ours is not beefy enough.
I think a point, Chair, as well, is I know it's all come back to resources about the route maps.
Yeah.
For disabled users and able users, to be honest with you, because...
I mean, I think I raised it in the pre-meet with that question. They were pushing it back towards the Welsh Government and the Welsh Government maps. So maybe the question there would be the council should be doing it, but it seemed to be a national issue as well. So when Michelle, I think, answered that question, and it was, when I was listening at the answer, it was about, well, the Welsh Government put on the maps and they're in different formats, and we do our best, but more could be done. So I'm not sure how we're going to word it, but it's important.
They did say there was an audit taking place, isn't there?
I mean, my view is maps for routes are not accessible to a lot of disabled people. They're not.
I also raised the issue that I brought up, which was not about my ward. It was about the fact that if you want detailed mapping for disabled people in powered wheelchairs or walking even, you can't get it, because we've got. I know they haven't done this bit of work because they've been trying to find somebody to do it. If you want to map every single bump, curb, ramp in an area, so you can get from A to B and get onto Pat Bates's routes, you can't do it. But they should be able to provide that. So people with sighting problems, even, what they're saying is they haven't got that. They've got the maps to show you it, but what they can't do is put a line on it to show you the route down your ramps. They should be able to do that. They've got the maps to do it.
The impression I got from Pat on that one was that
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of work, and they haven't got the money. That was Stuart. And the other problem, particularly with the drop curb, there's a huge demand for drop curbs, and even keeping it up to date is very difficult.
They mapped every single drop curb because it's on the maps.
Well, no.
They are there.
I wrote down what he wrote.
Unless we let Kath come in a sec.
Yeah, in relation to that, I wrote down what he said. Not possible to resources, as in staff and funding issues. A full borough-wide audit would be required before they could even start it. And obviously what he's saying is they haven't got the resource to do that. But in the recommendation that I've just written in relation to maps and disabled users, this might cover everything. Consider working with Welsh Government to make maps of routes more easily accessible to disabled users. And then they hear, they know what you've covered, that's what they can discuss.
I think that... It is a real issue, Stuart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think we need to get something about the department itself. Are they understaffed? I mean, to me, they seem to be struggling.
Yes.
I think we need more information. How do we put that into a recommendation
When we
or
talked
just
about succession planning, that was something that Michelle said that they've been looking into and are planning on looking into going forward. So it could be something that we say, you know, carry on with your inquiries around, one, succession planning, two, linking with what we've said about the dedicated officer. Yeah.
I just add a little word or two there. That we have concerns, really.
We have, yeah.
You know.
Sorry, I'm not on the mic. I'll start again. No, we'll word it about with concerns. We've made the strong recommendation, which I hope we'll get listened to, about we need a dedicated officer and something around the succession planning to pick up your point. Stuart?
That's it.
Bearing in mind, I work with several of the officers quite closely. I am worried about it because most of what happens because of the professionalism and skills of individual officers. What I'm not convinced about is that stuff being put in. It's like a lot of things in the council. Is it in the system or is it within the officer? I mean, I don't know how you put that in writing, but it's like a lot of things we do.
I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, Stuart, if we get an active travel officer, that will be a big step forward. No, I mean, it's not going to solve all the problems. And I mean,
the same problem, yeah.
no, but I mean, that's going to be our first recommendation. I think that one. Can I cast the one about the cycling? The Giles Davis point about having cycles available at the start and finish of a route. I think what we came to with that was there's a pilot somewhere else, and we recommend that this is examined once the results of that pilot are known. And I'm just trying to make sure that Giles isn't here, that particular point is picked up.
There is a cycle hire there is a cycle hire set up down at the stadium, but they're for disabled people. They have tried it at Goitre Wharf. I think it's commendable, a good idea, but we need to encourage probably private or voluntary sector, private hire people to come in, because that's the only way you're going to get it. But they have tried it. And the skis people tried it.
That's fine, Stu. I just think the first step, if it's being trialled either private or by councils elsewhere,
you need to be finding space to go.
Yeah.
That was the big problem.
Yeah, but if we have a look at that,
yeah,
I think we need to emphasise as well, it's got to be for disabled people as well.
That's already
and
there.
The possibility of electric bikes.
Yeah, they're already.
let's keep going, Kath.
I think everything is covered now within everything we've.
So I think we should congratulate them. I mean, Pat Bates said they'd raised £6.5 million over the last few years.
15 years.
£6.5 million.
£6.5 million is an amazing amount.
Yeah, I think we should show that we appreciate the work they've put in to date.
I totally agree. I mean, I couched the question about succession planning around how appreciative we were of the officers. So,
can I also say that Pat Bates is incredibly willing to work with councillors, because I've got I'll tell you how much it was, £25,000 worth of paths put into Cwmbran Town Centre and round Pontnewy. And I said, he said, where do you want them? They're there. And
they haven't been selected.
No, the reason was because there wasn't anything going into the town centre. It wasn't just in my ward, it was into the town centre.
Right, we'll make sure, that will come under observations, I think, but we'll make absolutely sure there's a strongly worded message from the committee, of the work that, appreciation of the work that officers have done on this agenda. Now, we'll just quickly let Kath recap on the recommendations, then we can finish the meeting. All right, that's fine.
Okay. So obviously, as always, I'll go away and write these in a form of words and send them to you to respond to. but we're looking at concerns around the lack of staffing currently and the succession planning. So actively look to utilise funding to appoint a dedicated active travel officer, or if that is not possible to do in-house, consider a joint approach with other local authorities. So we talked about connectivity in the area that should be considered, and if there are any areas where connectivity is being considered, amenities need to be accessible by pedestrians and cyclists as well as by motorists. Then we talked about, in answer to the active travel group, yes, definitely we think that there should be one, and there should be a terms of reference for that so that it's officially formed. And look to see if we can suggest an active travel champion from the elected members to sit on our active group to gain more experience and understanding of the role. And then to look at the measures of success and investigate the tax relief scheme for the cycle to work. So with that then, it encourages council employees to either cycle to and from work or to and from meetings if that isn't possible. And then we talked about signage and the code of conduct for cyclists. It needs to be more specific, and that can be done through this review that they're going to shortly be carrying out, along with signage that clarifies the responsibilities of the users of the routes, because that's not currently in place. And then consider working with Welsh Government to make maps of routes more easily accessible to disabled users. And then finally the comment to congratulate the officers for their hard work and the money that they have secured through grant funding. Have I covered that? Everything?
When you came up with something when I was talking about Mike came up with something when I was talking about Cwmbran, he was talking about the concept of personalised travel programmes. I really like that idea. Can you put it in context if you could, because you did write it down? I just think that's a superb idea.
Yes, he did talk about that, and I think that's something, though, that Sustrans would deliver rather than officers. But what I can do is put in the comment section that that's available for the officers to liaise with Gwyn on.
Yeah. And then the other one that I put in about using the routes and such for social awareness raising, possibility of us having some fun events around linked with the big event and party in the park to raise awareness. Something rather when we get availability of officer time and looking with the community councils as fun events, because we should make this is dry, some of it, and we need to sort of
that going as just an observation.
Yes, please, because that's our aid memoir to me and Norma and other people.
Priority for pedestrians. I think in the code of conduct you need to put that in somewhere, because pedestrians are pushed out of the way in a lot of these.
That was one of the observations that we should keep.
Yes. Because they did say.
Whatever we do, we should be making sure the message about pedestrians
safety.
is more priority.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just quickly, I agree with what you said about using the track for more things to get people used to it and awareness. But we should be working with the sports development officer as well in that regard, possibly.
We've got these
as observation.
With that is that they would then be invited to sit on the active travel group.
And we'll pick that up in the. Once do it, you can look at the Public Service Scrutiny Board Committee.
Green infrastructure tomorrow, and this is all obvious stuff to slip in there. Yeah.
Very quickly, we've got enough of recommendations now. You'll all have a chance to see them and comment on them before they are finalised and sent to the executive member. Before I close the meeting now, the next meeting is on the 4th of March at 1:30, and we'll consider waste and recycling, modernising our service. That's the issue. Now, we need to always ask you these questions, and this is something that came out from the Wales Audit Office in the past. Do you think there's a reason to invite the executive member to the next meeting? Yes or no? Do you think we should be inviting Fiona Cross to the meeting?
Personally, I think we should, Chair.
Norma?
Go on.
Yes, right, that's done. Do you have any suggestions for invitees? to this meeting on waste and recycling. It's we're going to waste and recycling, modernising our service. I mean, the key invitees from my perspective are Rachel Jowett and the main officers. Yeah, yeah.
Chair, in the past we have had officers from the Newport Borough Council.
I haven't got a view on that. I don't know how the members have.
We've had operatives as well.
Do you want look at what other authorities are doing and see if anyone would be interested in coming from that perspective? Yeah.
Just a thought, Chair.
Well, we could consider inviting somebody from a neighbouring local authority for a view. I mean, I don't know how successful we'll be in getting someone along, but we could ask. Yeah. Anyone else?
We have had operatives before now.
For example, do we know?
Lorry, one of the recycling lorry drivers. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
And what about inviting a frontline member of staff then?
That's what we're on about.
Would that be possible, Kath?
That's what we
We'd
did
have to
before.
get Ken into. Sorry.
That's what we did
The only thing I will say to that is obviously we would need to ask that, and they're obviously out working on routes when we meet.
Yeah.
So it could be that if we did want to speak to a frontline officer, it might have to be outside of the meeting at a time that would suit them, because obviously if they're still working while we're in a meeting, it wouldn't be possible. Whereas if there would be someone who would be interested in talking, it might have to be on their terms.
Should we just go on, Norman?
Other authorities, if their method is quite different to ours, it wouldn't be. It would have to be someone who was going down the same route as Torvine. Yeah. Otherwise, it'd be a waste, wouldn't it?
You're right.
And every authority's got their own way of doing things.
I mean, my experience is that if we take our waste recycling centre, I think it's one of the better ones that I've seen.
Yeah.
I'm just in my experience, and I used to live in Newport area, so I've got experience in the Newport one. I haven't got experience of the Monmouthshire one. I don't know. Well, should we take advice on officers about that? Because I don't want to invite somebody if they're using totally different system to us. So we'll let Canon advise us on that. And finally, do you have any suggestions for visits? I haven't got any. I just think it's hard enough to get us to the pre-meeting and the meeting, but it's open.
A visit to the recycling centre or somewhere like
Only
something
if
like that.
it's relevant, and where they're talking about this, I think they're looking at more around trade waste and curbside recycling and that type of thing. So I don't think there really is anyway. I always put it down, and some meetings would allow for that, and others wouldn't. You know, the shop has.
Yeah.
I've been to down there to see the recycling, and I was done. But they were going to enlarge on that. I find it interesting to see what improvements have been made.
I suppose it depends on whether it's relevant to the particular bit that they are modernising within the report, and we haven't got that yet. So I mean, we'd have to think about that. Yeah.
Can we ask?
But when we complete the pro forma, there's sections for each of those things that we talk to the officer about. So I mean, it'll be dealt with.
The last time I went down under my own steam, and it was very useful and informative.
Charge Kath with making inquiries about that.
New vehicles in this.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, it'd be nice to see the new vehicles, and even if they haven't got them, some idea what they're like. I mean, I've actually bought new vehicles for recycling schemes, so I'm probably a little bit more advanced than most people are around here.
How long ago?
It's not relevant now, because we talk about recycling with nothing like this.
I think I'm going to shut the meeting down now. I'd like to thank members, the officers and the invitees who have left for contributing to the meeting, and as always, I'd like to thank Kath for all the hard work she's done in preparing the meeting, and Chris for standing in at the last minute and having all the work now of writing this up. I'm very grateful to you, Chris, for that. So thank you both very much. I'm now going to close the meeting to the press and the public, and thank you.